Amazing.
So we are live, and if we have hello everybody. Sorry that we're late. I misplaced some things, but I found my black lace.
Hello, everybody.
And I made a Mothman. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Yep,
you're
good.
You can hear me, okay.
Yeah, mic sounds great.
Oh, this sounds great. Good, because it's a brand new microphone, and it's plugged in, and it's saying to me that it's working. But maybe
that sounds really good.
My problem is that it's not that this thing is old. It's that it's haunted. Maybe there's like something in there.
You got the gremlins. That's what that is.
Yeah, it could be.
As long as you don't water them and feed them after midnight, you should be okay. Before that, they're fairly cute. So, and if you have an extra one, maybe you'll probably want one. So, yeah. You look like a mogwai.
If I had really prepared, I would have bought red lights and put them up there for the eyes. I think the backdrop of red lights, of course, purple is good against the black, the wings. This is two-tone. This is black, and this is actually a scarf. And those, you know what those are? And I thought at the last minute, I totally thought of it at the last minute. Those are scrunchies to put in a ponytail. And I bought a bag of them, like of 500, really cheap from Amazon. And I said to myself, yeah, the scrunchies.
Maybe the Mothman was just really trying to give people good hair care, because I could use that,
Yeah, and style, fashion as well.
Yeah, literally the only reason he was approaching everybody was because he just wanted to tell everybody, look, I'm trying to help you with your fashion. They didn't need to be afraid. They didn't need to be scared. It was just,
hey, it makes sense to me, That's the world I live in. So let's start off with the Mothman. When did the Mothman make his first appearance?
Well, that was interesting. It's like I'm a novice to a lot of different things. I mean, Mothman is like one of the better known things that of cryptozoology. It's kind of like it's like the DC or Marvel of the supernatural. You've got like Bigfoot and Nessie. They're kind of like Superman and Wonder Woman. Well, Mothman is Batman. And that actually ties into something later I'll tell everybody about. But I knew a little bit on the surface about Mothman, and I'd always heard about Mothman growing up. And Mothman occurred probably like 2 years before I was born, so that'll date me. But it's a legend that's always been a part of the supernatural and cryptozoology as far as the modern era. And then it's basically one of those things that people everywhere know, at least have heard of in a passing way, of the Mothman. And I think the movie probably in 2002, the Mothman Prophecies, with Richard Gere, I think it was Laura Linney, I'm trying to remember.
Yes, that's right.
It really had nothing to do with anything. It was really just Hollywood's version of the story. The real story is actually so much more interesting. And I think, at least personally, I feel that it's one of the true things that really seems real to me, because it takes place in West Virginia, and I grew up in a small town myself, and Point Pleasant is a small town, and it's in an area that it's surrounded by rivers, and there's a bridge called the Silver Bridge, which is the bridge the real famous bridge that collapsed, but it's on the border there with Ohio. So it's an area, and also has a really interesting history as far as the history of our country and history from like the 18th century. It's just a really storied place. And the thing I was telling Megan about and a couple of other people about when I first started studying the Mothman was that, and again, I'm still really a novice. It's like people online, there's so many good sites, and I'll have to thank them before we end, because I really do want to thank them. They helped me with getting a little bit more information that I didn't have before. And it's like they basically...
It's hard to find it. I look for it, and it's very hard to find it.
Yeah, it's and what's really interesting is that the best... a lot of people are probably going to... take issue with the fact there's two people that normally are associated with the Mothman. That's Gray Barker and John A. Keel. He's the guy that wrote the Mothman prophecies. Gray Barker was the first person to talk about the Mothman. I kind of discount him because he's also very famously the first person who brought up the term Men in Black to describe the people that showed up at events, human or non-human, in order to quash stories about UFO activity. He's actually from West Virginia. He got his start doing the Flatwoods Monster, which is another monster that's really famous. It's like a spade-headed monster that has glowing eyes. It was robotic in appearance, and it gave off a noxious...
So I'll have to buy a spade the next time.
Right? Like a big, giant playing card.
Yeah.
But he got to start on the Flatwoods Monster and doing stories about that. And then in 1956, he put out a book called They Know Too Much About Flying Saucers. And then in the 1970, he put out a book called The Silver Bridge, which was about the Mothman and the Silver Bridge. But the thing is with him, he never took it seriously. He fabricated evidence. He made up stories. Just to sell stories and books. He made fun of the people who believed in these things behind their back. He actually told one of his family members that I write the kooky books for the money. That's literally a quote from him that I think it was his sister said.
You can't really believe
books for the money.
What he's written then, because it's all through a filter.
But you hear so many people that they're like, oh, he's who you go to, Gray Barker. He's the guy. Same way with John Keel. It's like John Keel wrote. He was a writer he originally got his start, I think, in he had like a training in psychological manipulation and I think Playboy, believe it or not, yes, they read it for the articles. I think in like 1966 or 67, they were the ones that actually sent him to Point Pleasant to do this story. And he kind of didn't really want to do it. If you ever read his initial letter about it, he was actually making fun of the townspeople, making fun of people who believe in this stuff. Because at the time, it's sort of like J. Allen Hynek when he first had to do Blue Book and he was studying UFOs. He really was dismissive of it. And he thought he'd be a quick slam shut, but what he started to find out was that it was everything but that, and it eventually turned Hynek into a believer and into somebody who championed the UFOs. But anyway, Keel 1975 was when he wrote the Mothman prophecy. So it was quite some time after the events of which it all occurred. The problem also too is that there's one lady that I looked to. I think she was a lot like I guess you would say like Kolchak the Night Stalker. She was her name was Mary Hyre, Hyre. She was a writer for the Athens Messenger, which was Athens, Ohio, and they had a bureau in Point Pleasant, the office there that she wrote for, and she wrote a column called "Where the Waters Mingle." She was one of the first persons to really delve into the Mothman story and to like. She would just, and the great thing about her is she would list people, addresses, dates, times, whereas when you read, Barker and Keel, it's like Bob of the Northridge area said that he saw on this, date. And there's no way for anybody days, months, years afterwards to ever track this stuff down and try to give some, some credence to it. And the other thing too about Keel is that he was covering a lot of different areas. He had his fingers in a lot of pies when he got to Point Pleasant. He was covering like the UFO flaps that were occurring over Point Pleasant. He was that every day you would have diamond-shaped UFOs flying every day over Point Pleasant at 10:30 on the dot. That's not really the case. He wrote a lot about an individual called Indrid Cold, which was a robotic individual that smiled like the Joker, who had a fixed grin. But then when you read the actual police reports from the guy that got pulled over by Indrid Cold, who supposedly had this encounter with this being, the guy was actually really pleasant, seemed to be a normal human being, and he didn't have his face fixed in a grin. So it's like, it's hard to tell who to believe on this, because there was so much in that era that they were pushing to try to make the story sell. And that's what, selling the books. I think probably John Keel's, greatest two accomplishments are one, that he got the Mothman prophecies published in it, and it is the book that it is. And then Two is that he got a cover done by Frank Frazetta, who's probably one of the greatest artists of all time. So those are his two claim to fames. But one of the things that I do kind of agree with him on is that he had this theory of what he called ultra terrestrials, which is basically he didn't believe in UFOs. He said eventually he thought the hypothesis of an advanced civilization traveling to Earth is just to do mischievous things and abduct people and cause harm. Why would an advanced civilization do that? And also too, just the technology to do that, why waste it on sending probes to Earth to mutilate cows, which by the way was occurring also in that area at that time. He said that he thought that they were like a non-human intelligence that has always existed side by side with us. Sound familiar? That can take any form, and that they were either like an advanced Earth society or an inner Earth society, or that they were interdimensional. He had no answers for it. That was just his theories. And towards the end of his life, he had some papers that he turned over to his fan clubs that he had, and to one of the people that he really trusted, that he said, I think they recently published it like a year or two ago, that stated basically he felt that we were being invaded from within by these entities, and slowly that's why that these entities have started to take over society, and that was his last theory that he had for that. It's not
Good
that I'm
theory.
aware. Yeah,
good theory. Demons taking over society. I wonder how.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I actually agree with him on, as far as and two, it brings up the question of what was the Mothman, or is the Mothman, because by the way, there's still people in Chicago, which I'll get to that too, which is a little bit kind of sketchy, but they're still saying in Michigan and Chicago that they're seeing the Mothman. The only problem with the Mothman in Chicago right now is that all of the reports seem to be coming through one URL and one website. So they, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to get either one of us sued. But they, as Megan said, sketchy. But they also too, the pictures that are coming back are really kind of, and I'll show some of those a little bit later, but they're literally normal things that you probably would see. That it's like the whole thing we were talking about the first broadcast we did about pareidolia, an apophenia, where your brain makes you think that you're seeing something. In fact, one of the pictures of the Mothman was recently taken in Point Pleasant. It wasn't recent. I think maybe it was like 2015 or 2016, but it was from a guy who supposedly had just moved into the area, said that he had never heard of it, which I find it hard to believe because there's a freaking statue of the Mothman in the park, right? And there's a Mothman museum.
Yes, so, that big metal statue.
Yeah, it's
and Joe, was it Rob's hero? Joe, the one who's going to save the world, that has wings of his own, Joe Manchin. He's going to save this country by his vote. That's, yeah.
Well, we were all rooting for Mad Dog. When I saw that Mad Dog was running, I'm like, heck yeah, who wouldn't want to have somebody like Mad Dog running your go? That's epic. I'm sorry, Mad Dog. You got our vote, buddy. We don't live there, but but yeah, it's and by the way, there's this really awesome bumper sticker and patch that they have through the Mothman Museum, which we're hoping to get to sometime one day to visit there. But it says that I made out with Mothman and he has buns of steel, because he really does have buns of steel. So it's pretty awesome.
Yes, I've seen. It's actually a very impressive statue.
Yeah, they wanted to make it a lot larger with like illuminating eyes and really much taller, but they ran out of money and funds for it.
It's big enough. It's big enough, but the glowing eyes would.
It's like, how big is too big for your statues? Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's really impressive. That's one of the things I think also too that helps me buy into the Mothman story, is because if you've grown up in a small town, you know that there are no secrets. Everybody knows everything. And I know that sounds like a joke, and I'm really not trying to make light of it. It's both a good thing and it's also a very terrible thing. It's a good thing when you need help. People usually are there to help you out. And people are very supportive in small towns and good-hearted and genuine. But you also have the backstabbers. You also have the people that talk. You have the people that make fun of you. You will not get away with anything because everybody knows everything. And so it's kind of, when I read the testimonies, the police reports from the teenagers that night, which is I'm sorry, it's Roger, Linda Scarberry, and then Steve and Mary Millette were the ones that kind of broke through on the story, because they were the first to go to the police, very begrudgingly at first, because they weren't quite sure if anybody would believe them, and people didn't. And it goes back to what we were talking about last time about people making fun of you and deriding you and insulting you when you bring these kind of stories to the forefront. And that's what happened to these kids. And you got to think, in a town like that, especially when they're publishing your name in the newspaper, when they do the reports, and everybody knows who you are, the kind of derision that they faced, and you'll hear that in their reports, because like when Mary and Linda, I'm sorry, I have to keep thinking, my brain is not on tonight, y'all. I'm so tired from work. Mary and Linda write their reports. You'll see that they were kind of upset that none of the parishioners, none of the preachers, none of the clergy came out to talk with them or try to help them to make any sense of what they saw and to comfort them. And that's not a crack on religion. I think they were just literally, their minds were kind of, like it is whenever you witness anything. You don't have a paradigm in which to fit it into, and they especially didn't, because this thing came at them and they had no idea what in the world it was. And also too, they really didn't get much support from the local law enforcement, because I think George Johnson, who was the Mason County sheriff at the time, he told them that he felt that the Mothman was a bird called the shite poke, which when you look up what the word shite poke means, and you know what shite means if you're Irish or English, you know what shite means. But basically, it's a heron, a very large heron that's got a red around its eyes. And it does have what they call tapetum lucidium, which is eye shine. There's a, which I was also going to go into that night. Now might be a good time, but there's a layer on the back of certain animals' eyeballs that have this layer right here is the tapetum lucidium, but it's a reflective layer that basically reflects back. It's basically for animals that either hunt at night or so a lot of times with eye shine, you'll see animals have different eye colors. And like you were saying earlier, the Mothman was well known for having red as its eye color. Well, George Johnson, the Mason County sheriff, he said that he thought it was a shite poke because it gave back this red eye shine. And, basically the kids really weren't taken that seriously by a lot of people, because they felt that, they just saw an animal out there. They got spooked. They thought the kids had been drinking. The place that they were at is called the TNT area. It's the Clifton F. McClintock Wildlife Management Area, which was during the Second World War. It was known as the West Virginia Ordnance Works, or WVOW, which was basically a large ordnance facility. They in the manufacture of ammunition and shells, and they had 100 or so concrete domes, which were basically like bunkers. They were very thick-walled concrete bunkers, and they would manage and store the munitions on site. And they had their own power plant on site to provide energy and pump water and things like that. And it was called the North Power Plant on the north end of the complex. That when they were at this spot, they basically had driven up there. Both of them were married couples. This was a place that was well known for just people to sit quietly or make out. That's what they did. It was like the Lover's Leap of Point Pleasant. And at that time, it was a more open area. It was easy to see the moon. Now, when people go there as part of tours or visits, this place is really overgrown, almost like a jungle. There's a lot of vegetation. The place was actually in the 1970s. It was declared what's called a super site, or it was because of toxic waste from all of the production. They all of the aquifers and the water on all four sides of this complex had been soaked with like nitrates and TNT and the chemicals used in the making of that. So it was a huge toxic slush area. And in May 2010, I think it was, they had a huge explosion there because one of the companies that had leased one of the concrete igloo domes and stored ammunition there, or powders used in the making of ammunition. It detonated and blew up. So that caused a big, huge shutdown of that area and allowing people in to see the area. But that's the place where they initially saw Mothman, and it was a place. The North Power Plant building is what they call the birdhouse, or what they called the birdhouse. It was torn down, I think, in 1990 because it was so decrepit at that time. You have to understand that building. I think they were built I think it was like from 1942 to 1945 that they used that facility. Let me grab a picture of that so y'all can see that. But it was a really large area that employed a large number of people from the town, and it was supporting the war effort at that time. And in the 1960s, when the kids were there, that was just a place to go to because it was abandoned. This is what it looked like in its heyday. Wish I had a better photo, y'all. But it's a really large facility that they had that basically that they're doing this production or whatever. So to make a long story short, the kids go there and they are parked or pulling up into the facility, and the headlights hit this creature, and it's standing at the edge of the power plant, and they notice that the wings are folding in and out. And I think it was like Linda that said, or no, Mary that said, there's something there. And then when it turned, the car headlights hit its eyes, and that's when you saw the bright red eyes of the Mothman, and it ducked behind the building. Well, it kind of freaked them out, so they made the option to leave. And when they did, this thing started chasing after them, and they got up to a speed of like 100. Their reports vary between 100 to 105 miles an hour, but this thing was chasing them the whole way, and it kept up. And Mary said that basically this thing did not have a head. It was just basically sloped. It was like I don't want to be pulling out a lot of stuff tonight, y'all, because I have to. If we were really organized, we'd have like this computer that we could just hit the button and show you a picture, but I don't have that. But Roger Scarberry drew a picture of what he saw, and this is what it looked like. This is literally the original picture that he turned into the police. Notice that it doesn't have a head, and he said that it had long wings, 10-foot wings that went down to its feet. They all said that it basically had human legs, and really strong, muscular human legs and human feet. So I think
and it was that tall. There's no bird. Oh, wow. There's no bird that's that tall. Yeah. And a bird I've never known a bird to chase after anybody.
Yeah, well, again, that's why a lot of people thought that what they eventually had happened was that they had newspaper reports at the time started saying they felt that it was a sandhill crane because there was a let me see who it was. Robert L. Smith, associate professor of wildlife biology at West Virginia University. He believes the thing which frightened the kids is, a bird. The only problem with that is that most of those birds only grow to like 4 feet tall, and they definitely don't have a 10-foot wingspan, and they definitely don't fly 100 miles an hour. And they generally, like you said, they do avoid humans. And so that was one of the things that let me grab the police report. So I hate to keep doing this to you guys, but I think it's very interesting if I read this to you so you can get an idea of what, and understand that this is actually, this is Linda Scarberry. And this initially took place on November 15th, 1967. This is what they turned into the police. We were riding through the TNT area on a side road by the old powerhouse building around 12 o'clock on Tuesday night, November 15th. 1966, when we came over the small rise in the road. All at once, Steve yelled for us to look at the thing in the road. I looked up and saw it go around the corner at the old powerhouse. It didn't run, but wobbled like it couldn't keep its balance. Its wings were spread just a little. We sat there a few seconds, then Roger took off. I kept yelling for him to hurry. We didn't even stop for the curves. We got out on Route 62 and was coming down the road, and that thing was sitting on the second hill when you come into the first bad curves. As soon as our lights hit it, it was gone. It spread its wings a little and went straight up into the air. When we got to the armory, it was flying over our car. We were going between 100 and 105 miles per hour down that straight stretch, and that thing was just gliding back and forth over the back end of our car. As we got there in front of the lights by the resort, it dived at our car and went away. I could hear the wings flapping as if to get more speed as it went up. We were all terrified and kept yelling for Roger to go faster. As we came into that straight stretch by C.C. Lewis's farm, the thing was over our car again. Then it disappeared as we came up into the lights by C.C. Lewis's gates. We went on downtown and stopped at Dairyland and tried to decide what to do. We just sat there and looked at each other. I wanted to go to the police, but Steve and Roger kept saying they'd just laugh at us. We talked about it a while, and Roger and Steve wanted to go back up the road. Mary and I kept trying to talk them out of it, and finally when we go to C.C. Lewis's gate, they decided they didn't want to go back, so we turned around. And this is a great part. If you want to make a movie out of something, you should do this. As we were turning, we saw the dead big dog laying in the road. When we were almost turned around, this thing jumped and leaped over our car and went through the field on the other side of the road. We decided to go to the police then and went down and around Tiny's drive-in looking for them. Gary, who was the manager, was outside the drive-in getting ready to take a couple of boys home. So we told him about seeing this thing and asked him to call the police. After the police came, we went back up the road in our car with Gary and the police about a half mile behind us. I saw it then in the pasture with its wings out a little walking towards the car. Then it went up in the air and came at the car. As Gary's car lights came over the rise in the road and the light shined on it, it disappeared. We went up and down the road looking for it, but didn't see anymore. That's literally how she said that. We went back down to the drive-in and got in Gary's car and went back up. We finally found Millard Halstead and got with him and went to the powerhouse building. We sat there with our lights out for about 15 or 20 minutes when I heard that squeaking sound like a mouse, only a lot stronger. The shadow went across the building over the hill across from us. Mary and I saw the red eyes and then told Millard. He shined his lights right there on it without being told where they were. We saw dust coming up from the ground and somewhere as Millard moved the spotlight around. We finally left and came to the trailer. The Millettes were afraid to go to their apartment, so we decided to stay together, but we didn't go to bed. We just turned on all the lights and stayed up. Wednesday, we went up again to the building and found these tracks or off tracks around the building. Now, what's really interesting is when they were describing the tracks, they were saying that they were basically horseshoe shaped, but they don't really give any kind of an idea of like how the horseshoe was formed, whether it formed an M, whether it formed two horseshoes together. She just says they were like horseshoes, but smooth. And I've been trying to search, and maybe other people out there may know if there's pictures of this or castings. We don't know, but apparently it sounds like this thing had cloven hooves as far as I can tell. Anyway, Steve was around the boilers by himself, and suddenly he came running out white as a sheet yelling for someone. He said he saw it in the boiler room. That night it was seen at the Thomases, so we went up there, and Mary and I stayed in the house while Steve and Roger and a few other bystanders went looking for it. On the way up, I saw it from the highway above the trees gliding back and forth. They searched the area around Thomas's house but didn't find anything. We started home around 12:30, and I saw it in one of the maintenance buildings. Mary and I started crying, and Roger took off. I kept thinking about that thing following us, but it didn't. We went to my mother's, and I went all to pieces. Roger and my dad took me down to the hospital. I finally got back home, and we all stayed together that night, but didn't go to bed until 3 or 4 o'clock. We were still afraid to go to sleep. The next day, Thursday, we went back up with the reporters, and we all heard a clanging noise from inside the building. Roger, Steve, and the reporters went back in and found that the boiler door was open and that Steve had shut just a few minutes before that. That night, we went back up, and Mary Hire and I saw the eyes, which was the Mary High I mentioned earlier from where the waters mingle. That night, we went back up, and Mary High and I saw the eyes inside the fenced-off place inside the powerhouse building. On the way home, I saw its eyes back in some trees from the road as the car went past, and looked back and could see its form. This is the last time that I have seen it. To me, it just looks like a man with wings. It was dirty gray color. It has a body-shaped form with wings on its back that come around it. It has muscular legs like a man and fiery red eyes that glow when the lights hit it. There was no glowing of the eyes about it when the lights hit it, until the lights hit it. I couldn't see its head or arms. I don't know if the eyes are even in a head. When we came down the straight stretch by the armory, it didn't even seem like it had any trouble keeping up with us. It must have very powerful wings. At no time did this thing fly at us from the front of the car. It stayed behind the back end of the car while it was chasing us. It seemed to be afraid of lights, but I read in the paper today that it has been seen in the daytime in town. That I don't understand. The prints we found at C.C. Lewis's gate and at both the powerhouses and at Thomas's look like two horseshoes put together, but they're smooth. I know people are laughing at us, but it's no laughing matter. We'll never forget this thing. It has affected our lives in many ways. I am keeping going on nerve and sleeping pills. When it gets dark, I feel the fear creeping over me. When I go any place, I automatically look up and out the windows. I'm afraid to sleep at night, so I lay awake sometimes crying with fear. When I do sleep or go to bed, the lights burn all night. Even in the daylight, I'm afraid to be by myself. I walk around in my own house expecting to see that thing. I close my eyes day or night, and I can see those fiery red eyes staring at me. Every little noise scares me to death. I can stand in a crowd and hear people talking about us and laughing. People have said we were probably liquored up, but we were not. They go up there expecting to see it, but when they say they don't believe us. We have seen it, so we know what to look for, and we are constantly looking, not because we want to see it, but because we're afraid we'll see it again. Out of all the phone calls we've gotten, not one minister is called to help us or try to explain what it is. We all agree we'd like to talk to a minister about it, but no one takes us that serious. One minister even laughed, and they said they'd finally run the devil out of their church, and that's what we saw. We've been harassed and laughed at and called crazy. We just can't go up there and hand it to the people on a silver platter like they seem to want us to do. We are really never going to get over our fear until we find out for sure what this thing is. I know I'll never forget it. I don't think anyone who has seen it can. But anyway, that's just to give you an idea of, like, I don't think that someone that's wanting to just hoax or fake something is going to write that to a police report, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty embarrassing, especially for men to write
Yeah,
something like that.
But it's really interesting though, because the it's there was like a whole host of and I do have a timeline of that. The first person who actually saw it was a guy called Kenneth Duncan. This was Saturday, November 12th, 1966. He was in Reamer Hill Cemetery in Dunedin, and they were digging a grave for his father-in-law. And he saw what he described as like a brown man-shaped creature with wings that was flying around the trees. And none of the other persons in the group saw it, but it lasted for about a minute, and then the thing flew away. He didn't actually want to report it because he felt like people would think he was crazy, or, you know, like the girl said, that he's on the sauce or something. So he just kept quiet. And then when he heard about what happened, you know, that night with the Scarberries and the Millettes, he came forth and said, you know, I saw this thing already. There was also, and it's amazing the timeline on this, because it lines up almost geographically. It's as if this thing was traveling across the countryside. The next one was Merle Partridge, or Newell Partridge, as he sometimes called it. It was November 14th, 1966. That was around 10:30. It was about an hour and a half before the girls and their husbands saw Mothman. He basically heard this noise outside, and his TV started distorting. It started having like a heart-shaped carotid pattern on the television. And the TV started squealing, so he had to shut it off, and the lights were flickering on and off. So he goes outside, and the way he described it, he didn't describe the Mothman or any type of creature. He said there were just red lights running around the outside of his barn. And so his dog ran to go, and then stopped, and then started growling, and then it took off after it. Well, he didn't see his dog. I think his dog was a German Shepherd named Bandit. And what's funny is in the accounting of the when it happened, it was kind of hilarious, because what he mentions inside the report is that my dog cost $50 and he didn't come back. I just think it's so funny. But he basically, he was another person who reported it, and this was an hour and a half before the two couples did. And this went on for several days of people seeing this thing. And again, they basically chalked it up to what they called the bird creature. And there was one report that I read, which I thought was incredibly fascinating. It was the first time I'd ever read anything like this when I was studying the Mothman. I had never heard of this before until I started this most recent studying, which was a man. This was during the daytime. It was a sighting where a family spotted a whole group of birds, but these birds were really large. They were enormous birds. Like, I mean, they had 10-foot wingspans. they had solid red eyes, and so I kind of wonder sometimes if if there's something to that. But they basically, the family said these birds were all milling about and gathered in the trees, and he watched these things for well over an hour. He said they thought about calling the police, but it was four birds, and it took place on November 26th. It was Marvin Schock, Ewing Tilton, and Marvin's two children, and that was on November 26, 1966. He said he witnessed four giant 5-foot gray and brown birds with 10-foot wings and a reddish cast to their heads in Lowell, Ohio, near Cat Creek. They first noticed the strange man-sized birds moving around in a tree. When they walked closer, about 100 yards from the birds flew up the ridge. The group followed the creatures by car and saw them about 200 yards from the home of Ewing Tilton near the edge of the woods. The oversized birds were reported to have dark brown backs with light flecks, gray breast coloration, and straight beaks about 5 to 6 inches. The birds kept their distance from the witnesses the whole time and were in view for about 2 hours overall before eventually flying out of sight. So that's the first time I've ever heard of anything natural or large birds, representing this, because most of the descriptions that they give for the Mothman are a large gray entity with no head, blazing red eyes, and some people say bat-like wings, other people say feathered wings, and so you don't really know specifically what this thing actually looks like. The other case that I thought was really interesting was probably the closest that the Mothman has ever been to someone. Let me read this to you. It's Marcella Bennett. Marcella Bennett was, to me, like the most fascinating case of all of these cases, because she's the one who actually got the closest to it. Marcella was actually outside with her baby, and she had a cigarette in one hand and her baby in the other. I mean, come on, it's the 60s. And she noticed that the shadow fell across her, and her family members were yelling at her. And when she turned around, she noticed that there was a large creature that stood up from behind the car, and it was a winged creature with red eyes. And she said it didn't have a head. It was gray. And as she moved away from it, she basically was in such terror, she dropped her baby. And she actually told the police this. She dropped her baby, and then she fell off her baby because she was terrified. So her family helped her to get the baby, and she got up. She burned herself with her cigarette. They finally got to the door, and this thing followed them the whole way, waddling behind them. They shut the door. The thing tried to breach itself into the door. They said it was kind of a haphazard sort of trying to get in the door, but it really was as if it was clumsily trying to get in the door. But she said she was so fixated by the eyes that they were having to pull her in, and she kind of just lost her bearings on where she was because she was so busy and intently staring into the eyes of this thing. They pull her in the house, they slam the door shut, and this thing was peering through the windows, and it kept going window to window and knocking on the door or banging on the door. And they got so freaked out, they called the police, but the police didn't get there until like 15 or 20 minutes afterwards. And they did find tracks outside of the house. And this was in Mason County. But yeah, it was really interesting because she said she described the creature as over 6 feet tall, like a giant bird, but yet also a man. Raymond and his wife, Kathy, were both very frightened and kept yelling for Marcella to run, but she was paralyzed by fear. When Marcella finally managed to turn around, she took only a few steps toward the house before falling to the ground in a state of shock on top of her daughter. She was unable to get up, as if in a trance. And I'm sorry about my reading tonight, y'all. It's just, this is hard to read. Marcella heard the flapping of the wings as she was trying to run. After pulling herself together, she picked up her child and ran into the house. The family locked themselves inside. Marcella's hands and knees were badly scraped and bruised. She had been burned from her lit cigarette, and from the side of her face was bleeding from where she had fallen. The children inside were all screaming and crying in panic. Raymond Wamsley frantically phoned the sheriff's department. By this time, Marcella was lying on the sofa and could hear him telling them to get to the TNT area because they'd seen the monster. He said they were locked in the house, but it was still outside. The creature is said to have shuffled onto the porch, pushed on the door, and peered into the windows. It took the police about 15 to 20 minutes to arrive at the house, but the creature was gone by the time they got there. They came with the guns drawn, that's what it says, with the guns drawn, and searched all around the property. The front yard was soon full of police cars and curious people. Raymond talked to the police and filled out a report. Marcella Bennett described the encounter as the most frightening experience of her life, and it was something she felt uncomfortable talking about. She never drove at night after her experience and had trouble sleeping because of her horrible nightmares. She once sought medical attention at Holzer Hospital to deal with her anxieties and lack of sleep. She didn't want to tell the doctor what she had seen, but then the doctor asked if she was one of the people who had seen the bird in Point Pleasant. Years later, she would hear wings flapping and noise on top of the roof of her home. Somehow she felt the creature now had a link with her and would come back. She would feel the creature's presence at all times that would send her into a panic. For example, she would feel as if she was in the backseat of her car, or if it was in the backseat of her car, and she would hit the brakes and turn to look behind her. So one of the things that you see that is really interesting is that, and I think Mary Millette mentioned this, and Linda Scarberry mentioned this too, but the fact that the eyes stayed with them, and that they, for years afterwards, they felt like this thing had a link to them. I saw earlier in the chat, somebody asked about if the movie was accurate. Not really. But one of the things that was accurate is that they did have electrical disturbances. There were premonitions. I think one of the most horrifying things that I read when I was studying this was Mary Hyre had a dream. And this was about a year before the bridge collapsed. But she had a dream where she was plunged into cold water and she would wake up. And then the next night she had a dream. She was floating in the water and there were bodies everywhere and there were presents everywhere. And then the next night it was just presents, and she didn't know what in the world that meant. And then it wasn't until a year later, when the bridge collapsed, she was in the bureau office in Point Pleasant, and she heard a loud bang, and it was the bridge, the supports on the bridge snapping, and the bridge plunging into the water. And then that's when she realized what the dream was about. And she saw, bodies and people, things, debris floating in the water, and it was around Christmas time. And so there are some things that, and what's even weirder is with Marcella's family, a lot of them were witnesses to this creature, and other witnesses in town that had seen this creature. They were on that bridge when it collapsed. So it's almost as if that's one thing about the movie that they do get right, is that John Keel and Mary had a lot of, and the townspeople had a lot of dreams and premonitions before bad things would happen. And they felt like that this creature was something that would just show up and bad things would happen, that it was like an omen. One of the things that I thought was really interesting, though, and I talked with Megan about this, is that it really irritated me, was that now with, the kids like to do their creepypastas. They like to do their fiction. So they've taken a very real tragedy of the Silver Bridge, and they have this thing now where the movie created, and in fact, the writer of the movie, a guy called Richard Hatem, he actually went on his own Twitter to try to debunk this, because he said, "I'm the one that came up with it. I was trying to put butts in the seats," but he said that the Mothman had been seen before 9/11, that he had been seen. The 1999 Soviet apartment bombings, that it had been seen as the Blackbird of Chernobyl, that the Mothman came out of the fires of Chernobyl with blazing red eyes, and that all of these firemen and had seen it. And it was a harbinger of doom that had been seen before all this time. And, Chicago, Fukushima, the I-35 collapse of the bridge in Minneapolis, I think, what was it, the Friedberg mine collapse. People keep coming up with all of these things where they say that the creature had been seen, and all of these literally were made up by this guy in this movie. And he has gone on and on to try to tell people, stop doing this nonsense, because you're making light of real tragedy, for not only Point Pleasant, but like Chernobyl. I remember telling Megan, one of the funniest things about researching this thing was that there was a site where they said that the Mothman had been known since the dawn of time, that there was this great unnamed cataclysm, so great that it's unnamed and undescribed. And I was like, wow, that must have been really impressive, But People post videos of they say there's, footage of the Mothman. It's a emaciated bear in a tree that's like a well-known bear that got rescued and is perfectly fine and healthy now, but they use that as video. Um, and I think people had a video of the Mothman in Las Vegas where it had been sighted in Las Vegas. The only problem is that it was a pictures of a group of palm trees outside the housing resort there, and everyone on the internet got online within about 3 seconds and said, "This is my driveway. There's a palm tree. You're not fooling anybody." They're like, "There's this winged demon in Las Vegas," and people are like, "No, that's our driveway, and that's the palm tree where Larry walks his dog. His dog takes a dump there." It's gotten out of hand. But I mean, it's like, and one of the things that people don't really think about is like, okay, let's say if hypothetically the creature did exist and it was the giant blackbird of Chernobyl, and it had a 20-foot wingspan with glowing eyes. One of the things that I was a website that I went to was talking about the kind of radiation in Chernobyl. It's literally the worst kind. It's like ionizing radiation, which is like the strength, the distance, and the duration. All of those factors were some of the worst ever mankind has ever experienced. And they measure it in called sieverts, which is like a measure. I think it's like 5 to 10 sieverts is what can kill a man like in a few minutes. And they have equipment from Chernobyl which still is registering at 360 sieverts. And if 10 can kill you, and I'm not a radiologist, so correct me if I'm wrong, anybody out there, but the thing is, if any biological entity, and yes, it could be a supernatural entity or interdimensional entity, but if it was a true biological entity, as everyone calls it, that thing would be dead in seconds, the way that those poor firemen were. And it just makes fun of their pain and the suffering that people in Chernobyl had, over that horrible, all the people that have died of cancer since then, the horrors that they went through. When they do stuff like this fan fiction and stuff, and it takes all these people at Point Pleasant back to that time when that bridge collapsed. That's their families, that's their relatives that they knew. One of the most touching things, though, is I found in a list of the victims, there was one that said Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I looked it up, and this guy apparently who lived in Winston-Salem was one of the victims on the bridge. He was in a sleeping cab in the back of a truck, and his buddy lived through that night, and he was a very religious man, and he said, when the bridge collapsed, they had no time for it. It was just that sudden, because it was basically a U-bolt on top of the bridge. That this bridge was like 40 years old at the time. It was built, I think, like in the 20s, and it just fractured. And the way the bridge was built, it was like a span bridge, and there was no supports and safety lattices like there are now, and so it just literally collapsed. And I saw what Three Stooges said about the Native Americans carved the Thunderbird with red-eyed wings, bird head, and human body. It's interesting you bring that up. One of the things I was going to talk about is how when people were saying that the legends of the Mothman, flying humanoids have been around since like forever. This is a bat god from Mexico. The reason I bring that up is because apparently in this particular culture, representation is not made of something unless it's real, and also too, it's not written about unless it's real. So these natives basically wrote about a bat god, which it wasn't a part of religious study. It was actually, to them, it was a real entity. So either they had a really large bat around that time or something. So it just was really interesting. And then you've got like the witch of Bruja, or the Bruja of Mexico. Let me pull that one out, which is another flying humanoid. People all over Mexico have seen this. It's basically a levitating being. There was a police officer who was actually attacked by it and ended up knocked out. They did drug tests and alcohol tests on this poor man. He's terrified to go out on duty, but apparently this thing attacked him. So there's also the humorous ones, which I'm sorry to keep doing this to you guys, but there was one in 1953 called the Houston Batman, June 18th, 1953, where 5 persons in a house, and I have to read this because it's hysterically funny. Anyway, we all looked up and saw a Batman. He was balancing himself on a tree limb, and there in the dim gray light all around him. He said the creature was about 6.5 feet tall, wearing a black cape and skin-tight dark pants. quarter-length boots, and looked like a white man. I could see him plainly and could see he had big wings folded at his shoulders. They said after the Batman perched in the tree a few moments while they all sat paralyzed and watched, a mysterious white flame and smoke shot from behind him, and a burning object like a flying paintbrush scooted across the horizon, and Batman faded from view. The walkers agreed it couldn't have been their imagination and said they were so upset they were thinking about returning to Bryan from where they had moved only 3 months before. So that's in an actual newspaper. So I don't know. Crazy. But
And what year did that happen?
That was 1953 in Houston, Texas, June 18th. Yeah. One of the things you notice, like with all of these stories, is there's like a level of high weirdness that occurs on a lot of these stories. And I think that's one of the things that I find so interesting about the Mothman is because it's not only do you have a flying creature, but you have, UFOs, you've got cattle mutilations, you've got all of these really crazy things that occur, hand in hand with its appearance. And there really isn't any explanation for it. So you have to ask yourself, is this thing a flesh and blood biological creature? Is it a true cryptid, something that's unknown that we haven't cataloged? Is it demonic? Is it spiritual? Is it extraterrestrial? Is it, a native? One of the things I thought was really funny is they had or not funny, I should say, was they had the legend of Cornstalk, which they say was an Indian curse that Hokalesqua, who was a Shawnee leader, he was one of the more moderate Shawnee Indian leaders in that area around that time. He was imprisoned in Fort Randolph and murdered because one of the colonists had, and this was like the 18th century, one of the colonists in the area was murdered. And so they murdered him in retribution. And they said that he put a curse on the whole town and the whole area. And that's why Mothman exists. The only problem with that is it's not even factually accurate. I mean, he didn't do that. He was actually a really rational person, probably their only last chance at having peace with the Shawnee in that area. And he was murdered. And it's sad. They have a memorial to him there, but I think it's sad that his actual very real human story gets blocked because people link him in with the Mothman. So they say, oh, it's a natural natural American curse, Native American curse. Is the Mothman subterranean? Or is he hiding in plain sight? They have people who say that he basically is, the reason that he's like a moth is because he camouflages himself. And there's actually a story of a lady who was there at the Wilderness Preserve, saw one of these creatures looking like a tree and said that it literally backed up and then the eyes flashed and then the wings unfolded and it took off. And one of the things you'll hear about him, Mothman that is that the wings come out and they don't even jump, they just rise up. So it's like you kind of wonder, like, what is the metabolism, the diet of this thing? What does it eat? It's in a natural reserve area, so there's probably plenty of animals. There's never been any record of it other than its encounters with humans where, it's attacking the vehicles or scaring the daylights out of people. Nobody's been killed by it, but, you do have animal mutilations. You do have the poor German Shepherd who, we don't know if it killed the German Shepherd. We don't know if it was a mutant, if it was part of the TNT area, the chemicals affecting a natural animal, if it's some kind of mistaken wildlife. I think one of the theories that they always put forth, like especially with the whole eye shine theory and the no head theory, is that it's a barred owl. But so far, I've never seen a barred owl that's 6 foot tall with 10-foot wingspan. So I'd love to get an ornithologist's view on that. The tracks are horseshoe shaped. Most animals, unless they're a horse, don't have horseshoe shaped tracks. You've got very credible witnesses in police, state patrol, news reporters. There's consistencies in everyone's reporting. There's also irregularities, but the consistencies outweigh the irregularities, and you've got very credible witnesses. But it's really hard to know what this thing is or what it was. It hasn't been really heard from since the Silver Bridge collapse, and people keep saying they see it in Chicago and Michigan. Again, I hate to go back to the little Rolodex here and pull out pictures, but this is the 2 most recent shots that they have supposedly of Mothman. And you would think in this day and age of cell phones.
Oh,
But
oh, that I can see the body.
yeah, well, here's the thing.
It does look.
This right here, what they're saying is, and a lot of people take a look at this photo, but where the legs are right in here, and I can't tell how to do this, but right there is a snake, and this is a bird carrying a snake.
Oh my God. Oh, how awful.
So they say that they think that that's an owl carrying a snake, and this man who said that he has never known about Mothman captured basically an owl carrying a snake. But he says it was really large, human size. But at that distance, it's hard to tell what the size is of an object. The other was this one, supposedly from Chicago, but and that looks
Almost
really
like a flying squirrel.
exactly, or like one of the wingsuits that they use. I don't know if anybody's ever seen wingsuits, but here's what I thought was really interesting. Somebody pointed this out. You flip it on its side, it's a monarch butterfly, pretty much.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah, and that was taken near Appalachia. I can't remember the statue, but it was a. They said that again, it goes all back to the whole thing of. I was just reading what Joe Dirt said about the large birds. Now, that's one thing that I always find really fascinating is there's a lot of historical stories about large birds, thunderbirds, great rook, things like that. And those are prevalent all throughout history. So there's also a lot of stories about things that sound a lot like pterodactyls. When you get into the middle area of American history, it's kind of a gray area because people were always telling tall tales. Even in newspapers, they were telling tall tales to try to sell papers. So you don't know, but occasionally you would find a nugget of truth in there. And so it's kind of, you wonder, you would hear about airships with green occupants. You would hear about giant reptilian birds. You would hear about giant beasts that roam the forest. And I think even Daniel Boone had a Bigfoot story. I think it's like right before he went to the Alamo. He was talking about how he met with a large woodland. He called him a woodland giant, a very hairy non-man, giant that told him his death was going to be in a few days. And I was like, I read that and I had to read it like 7 times to make sure I'd actually read that. But I don't think a man who's getting ready to go into battle is going to make up a story like that. So you kind of wonder, like, what on earth is, again, it's that high strangeness that you see in all of these accounts that make you wonder, what are these things? But with the Mothman, there's just so much information that these people provided about what it looked like, and it's completely consistent across the board. So even if they were getting it out of the newspaper, or even if they were talking about it in a town like Point Pleasant, and it's such a small town like that, it really would work against you to even bring up a story like that. I mean, even and where I live now is pretty much a relatively large city compared to the small town I grew up in, but I was always scared to bring up stories about things that I witnessed because of being made fun of. So imagine that in Point Pleasant, where you go to church with these people, you go to work with these people. It had to be unbearable for the Scarberrys and the Millettes and all the other witnesses that saw this stuff. And I don't think people would be that forthcoming, especially like what happened with Marcella Bennett. I mean, you're not going to call the police, falsely, especially in that area, to unless you're fear for your life. So that lends a lot of credence to what happened there. And the Silver Bridge collapse, that was like December, I think it's December 15th of 1967. Very turbulent time in our history, very turbulent time in our country. These people, Vietnam is rounding out. You have the Kennedy assassinations. You got all these things in America. We were going into space. In 2 years we'd be landed on the moon in July. But you have this small town that it has this thing visiting and terrorizing everyone, and then suddenly in December, you've got 46 people. I think it's 46 people killed and like 6 people injured or something like that in this bridge collapse, and it just brings everything in this town to such tragedy. And then this creature just suddenly seemingly just goes away. They don't hear from it anymore. It just disappears. But what I thought, this is again why I think it's. I pulled this out. This is one I found digging through all the different. I think this was actually one that John Keel took. It was Mabel McDaniel, Linda Scarberry's mom. And I think I couldn't find any sightings after that. If anybody out there knows, let me know. But it's kind of weird that this all ended off with Linda's mom. It stopped with Linda's mom, January 11th, 1967. And that's, after a month after the bridge collapse. Mabel McDaniels told John Keel of a large winged creature over Route 62, which was the road that her daughter was trying to escape it, near Tiny's Drive-In restaurant at 5:00 p.m. I thought it was an airplane, then realized it was flying much too low. It was brown and had a wingspread of at least 10 feet. I thought I could see two legs, like men's legs, hanging down from it. It circled over Tiny's and then flew off. The thing didn't seem to have a head or neck. And that was the last time that anybody saw that in Point Pleasant, at least as far as we know. So it literally, the craze kicked off with her daughter and ended with her mom. So that's a little weird. You could say that the family faked this, but I was showing Megan the pictures of the kids tonight. Let me grab it. And I hate to keep pulling out these photocopies, folks.
It's great. The photographs are actually great to have.
But when you fabricate a story or you're joking about a story, more than likely, you would come clean at a certain point. But these folks, it destroyed their lives. The Scarberrys eventually got divorced. And I think in the divorce, Linda asked for the car, which was Roger's favorite thing in the world. Like they said that he would actually threaten people if they scratched it. So that's how they knew the Mothman was real, because he would never let anybody scratch his car like that. This car is almost like the baby in Supernatural, or Kit. It's a car that's really fabled. People have been looking for that car for years. They've also been looking for the person on November 17th of 1966 that first called the Mothman Mothman. The Mothman was named that because at the time, Batman, if you know the Adam West Batman, Burt Ward Adam West Batman of the 60s, was full swing. And there was a character on there called the Moth. And people were, in a very derisive way, were calling it Mothman because, they said it looked like a giant moth. So one of the copier editors at one of these papers nicknamed it that. I mean, before that, it had been named the Man Bird, Birdman, variations thereof, but it was never really called Mothman until that point, in November 17th. Anyway, this is a picture of the kids the next day on that Wednesday when they went back out to look for the creature. I mean, if you look at those kids, they look troubled. They look like, sure, you could say they started a story and they made it up, and now the whole town's getting out there with guns looking for this thing. People are going to get hurt. They're worried they're going to get in trouble. I don't think it was that at all. I think they really witnessed something. I think they were so upset and so traumatized. And when the spotlight had been taken off of them after 1967, after the bridge collapsed, the spotlight was gone, and they're still living with the tragedy of the bridge collapse. But Linda and Mary both still had major issues with, they had to take a lot of drugs to try to keep their nerves, to allow them to sleep. They slept with the lights on for years afterwards. The guys had a lot of issues with mood swings and said they were, these are guys from West Virginia. I think I'm tough. I'm not tough. I'm a pussy cat compared to these guys. These guys, you're talking about coal country. You're talking about train country. You're talking about people, farm country. These guys are tough as nails, and that area was used a lot for drag racing too. That's another thing that kind of gives me a little hint that it just kind of died out because the kids no longer use that area for drag racing, because I think everybody was spooked by this thing. And there was, I only read like a few instances of spottings, but I think it was like 100 or more. There was one that was incredibly creepy when they went to the North Power Plant where the the two guys went there just to see if there was any birds or to see. I think they were looking for a certain kind of deer. Said that they went inside the power plant because at that time it was unlocked and it was still in a pretty decrepit position. Like some of the walkways and gantries were really rusted. Sounds like perfect haunted house movie material. Long story short, the guy thought it was another person in there. So he called out to him and this thing moved and it shifted and went in the dark. And he said, then he saw two red eyes. And he said he freaked out and he just got frozen in place. And he said he couldn't do anything because whatever this thing was doing to him, he was just stuck. And his friend saying like, why aren't you moving? You're in my way. Keep going. And it broke his concentration on this creature. And he said, whoever you are, you shouldn't be in here. He said he knew it wasn't a rational response, but he said, you shouldn't be in here because it's dangerous in here. And his friend said, who are you talking to? And then that's when he saw it. And then the wings came out and this thing flew down to the next level. And about that time, they both realized they weren't talking to a human being. So they freaked out and got out of there. But they said they were lucky because if the thing had wanted to attack them, it would have. So it's very interesting that also too, that a lot of these people years afterwards, they would say that they felt like they still had a connection with this thing. So someone had asked earlier about whether that the movie was realistic, mainly in just that high weirdness that occurred, the bridge collapse, and the psychic visions that people had. But the characters, one of the characters was supposed to be based on Keel, and Keel never did anything like that. Richard Gere's character, Laura Linney, was supposed to be based on Mary Hyre. Laura Linney and Mary Hyre couldn't look anything more different from each other. This is Mary Hyre. So, sorry about that. That's Miss Hyre right there. Wow, this is so weird. There we go. That's Miss Hyre right there. She was a nice little old lady. She passed away years ago, but she, I think in her 40s. But she said she would have dreams about this thing even up until the day she died because she had seen its eyes. And so a lot of the people that had experiences where they had witnessed this thing, it stayed with them through all the way to the end of their lives. And some of the people, like I said earlier, one of the things the movie does get right is that some of those people on that bridge were people who had witnessed that creature. So it is kind of weird. And I'm not going to lie, it's no one knows what that thing was or what it is, if it still exists, if it's still out there. It hasn't been seen. People say they see it in Chicago. But like I mentioned earlier, all of the reports seem to be very questionable. Even I'm crap, as y'all can tell by this presentation, I'm crap at researching things, but even I can see by looking at those reports that they all are, there's something really questionable. You go to those reports and they say, that on a moonlit night, it's when that particular area of Chicago there's no moon out at that time. They, or they say looking west towards, and that building's not west, it's north, that kind of thing. It's just riddled with inaccuracies. It's as if somebody just said, I'm going to make up a story. It's kind of like MUFON. And like my stories, who the hell is going to believe my stories? I'm the only one who was there to witness it. So I could have made up anything, Bleeblob from the planet Arculus gave me technology, but I forgot how to, I'm just saying I'm sure that there are some sightings of creatures or things that people, they're not quite sure what it is, but I think what is interesting is a lot of the high rises they're getting reports from people at some of the casinos and places there of winged creatures. So who knows? Maybe that'll pan out. Maybe Mothman's making a return. So we don't know, but nothing from Point Pleasant so far, other than that somewhat sketchy picture that I showed you that looks like an owl carrying a snake. But you never know. They could be out there. It could be, who knows what these creatures are or were, but it seemed to die out, in 1967.
It's very interesting. Do you think this could be the Thunderbird, or maybe the Thunderbird was part man, part bird?
Well, what's interesting is that the Thunderbird was described as like so large it would blot out the sun, and like you read these stories of like there are, I can't remember exactly where I read it. It's probably on one of the cryptozoology sites, but there was like somebody in the 1950s who they were out camping with their kids, and they reported to the police that a bird had flown down and tried to take one of their children while they were playing in the creek. Um, and I'll have to see if I can find that. It's like one of the most interesting stories. And the kid was actually left with really major scratches on his arm, and it almost got away with him if it wasn't for the mom beating this thing with a cooler. And I just think that was so. But I remember reading that story, and I thought, somewhere out there has to be a police report for this thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I really love this. The more recently that I've been doing the research on this is because there's actual police reports to back this stuff up. There's actual evidence of what, or I should not say evidence, but more or less witness testimony, and that can be tied into very living people and not just some anecdote like Keel had. Yep, Three Stooges, you're right. This thing, I didn't mean to say that Mothman hasn't been spotted in other places, but it's a lot like Bigfoot. Here in North Carolina, we have people reporting Bigfoot in the sand hills. Traditionally, Bigfoot's been a Pacific Northwest thing, but people here, or Florida with the skunk ape, people are reporting, hominids all over the place. But it's really started to pick up here in North Carolina. I don't know why. I didn't hear those stories when I was growing up. There were stories, but not like on the level there are now of things peeking into trailers, peeking into houses. So I've heard Mothman stories from all across the country. There are people in Wisconsin who say they've seen it. It is interesting though. One of the things I did notice that was very interesting is like the Ohio River area does seem to be where a lot of these stories are, coming up of seeing winged creatures. They don't really say a Mothman or a humanoid. They just say a winged creature. So, so again, maybe Mothman got bored, decided to come out of retirement. I don't know. Maybe it was the hair care products that he's working on earlier with scrunchies. He's got his own scrunchie line.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's trying to, work the social media to get the scrunchie line out that Felina made for him. But it's just, yeah, I'm not quite sure, if this thing is back or not, but it doesn't appear to be like the flap that it was in 67, 66 and 67 when this thing was prominent. So that's another thing about it that gives it that eerie quality, is that it seemed to be around for these events and then just disappeared, into the consciousness. So that's why a lot of people chalk it up to birds or hysteria, but again, there's like really good anecdotal evidence. Like, even the police officers who would hit it with its spotlights and said that it looked like a large crane or a bird, but they noticed that it didn't have a head, or
crane. You can very specifically see a crane.
Yeah. And I did find some stuff about cranes that had migrated to, out of their normal areas and stuff. And that was really interesting to read too. One of the craziest stories that I came across, and if anybody wants to look this up, I can give you the exact issue. It'd be a little hard to get a hold of these though, because they used to have them on newsstands all the time, but they're not really very easy to get a hold of now. But the Soldier of Fortune, which was a paramilitary thing that used to be really popular in the 80s when I was a kid. The February 2014 issue had an article entitled UFO Mothman Mystery Solved. Mothman were actually Green Berets. Author Harold Hutchinson writes that the Special Operations Forces near Point Pleasant, West Virginia, were testing high altitude, low opening, that's HALO, parachuting for use in Vietnam. And HALO, if you know, that's like a lot of times what the Special Forces use, is where they go from really high altitude aircraft, they drop at velocity, and then they get below the cloud cover, and then they hit their chutes. The chutes are designed for low openings. This is so that they can minimize the amount of time that they're, that can be seen in the aircraft will be flying above cloud cover, so that reduces their risk too. And it helps to insert them in, very quietly. Anyway, they were saying that according to Hutchinson, the jumpers used luminous paint to be seen during the test. And so they say that this is what Mothman was. Yeah. So February 2014 issue of Soldier of Fortune. So if you want to try to find that, it's very interesting. But it said the Green Berets making those jumps hadn't figured out on was the fact that people on the ground could see it as well. Talking about the glowing paint.
They jumped out of the airplanes at night.
Wearing luminous paint, just like what you have on your watches. The radial.
Yeah, but was it I think anything that looks like a bird or having bird wings definitely have to have feathers.
Yeah, and I would love to talk to the soldier that chased after, the 1956, the 1956 car, vehicle that they had, the Bel Air, wearing luminous paint at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, sure.
So I don't know. It's funny when you read the testimonies of the couples. One of the things that they say in the testimonies, the police testimonies, is, and I think all three kids said it, was that people don't believe us, but it definitely wasn't a bird, and it definitely wasn't a human being, and they keep saying that, and I think that was one of the things that was really interesting. I'm gonna see if I can find out.
Even if you saw a man with wings, you would say, "Well, that looks like a military person with wings."
Yeah, and Roger was the most emphatic about it. When this thing what this thing looked like, it is about 6 feet tall with large wings on its back. It has the shape of a man. It has 2 red eyes about 2 inches in diameter, 6 to 8 inches apart. And that's another thing you'll hear a lot of people say in these testimonies too, is that they get. By the way, these reports were sealed. People in the town couldn't read these. Sometimes it was put in the newspaper, but they couldn't read this. So a lot of these people kept saying the same thing, that this is what they look like. It has 2 red eyes, about 2 inches in diameter, 6 to 8 inches apart, a wingspread of 10 feet. This thing, whatever it is definitely not a crane or a goose or balloon or any sort of the things it's been called. I have seen it and I know what it looks like. I have to live with it. That's an exact quote from him. I mean, he, and another thing too is guys, maybe not nowadays, but back then guys were very, the machismo and the testosterone was a big thing. And the kids I grew up with, farm kids, you didn't mess with the farm kids. Farm kids will kick your ass. The one thing to guys is keeping face. These guys wanted to go back and confront this thing, but the fact that their fear got the better part of them, and I mean that in a good way. They did the smart thing. They turned around and kept going towards town. Tells me that, that they were using cooler heads. The women prevailed and said, "Look, don't go out there. Don't try to chase this thing down." And the thing is, with most guys in that time period, and when I was growing up, is you go confront your fear, but which they kind of did when they went back, the following day during daylight. But it's still you read the story about Steve coming out of the boiler room with a, white as a sheet. Now, this is something that all of the townspeople recounted, and they said that whatever it was made a banging noise, and it was not a small bird. It wasn't a crane. It was heavy and large. And several of the townspeople reported hearing the sound of wings beating. So, that tells me that, again, that, it just leads more credence to what they were saying. And the fact that they're terrified out of their minds and they're willing to admit it, back then, that it just adds, again, it just keeps adding layers on to what I believe is very truthful. Yes, it could have been a mistaken identity of some unknown creature or a mutant bird that had eyes in its neck and didn't form a perfect head because it had so many chemicals in its, during its inception. I don't know, but it still leads credence that they saw something that they couldn't quantify, that they couldn't explain, and it scared them half to death. So I believe them.
Yeah. Is it especially that he kept appearing, was for about a year?
Yeah, it's literally, they time it out at about 13 months is what they say. And like I said, Mabel McDaniel was the last thing that I read, and that was in January 11th of 67. So the bridge collapsed December 15th of 67, and January 11th of 67 is when Mabel saw this thing flying over the Route 65 at Tiny's, which is like a drive-in. diner there. And so for me, that that was the last time that anyone reported seeing this thing. Um, and they still had really kind of strange events occur. So they just it's one of those things, like I said, that I really kind of believe these people, that this really happened and these people really experienced this. And so the evidence just to me seems really, on the face of it, these people saw what they saw, and it traumatized them and really affected their lives up until the very last days of their lives. I mean, some of these people lived indoors, or were scared to go out, had to go on medication, and that's not something that country people are going to do that easily. They're just not. I mean, because it's a sense of pride of you handle your own business, and to me that just speaks that they really did witness this entity.
Especially everybody who lives in that area is very familiar with all the animals out there. You think that they would have seen something like this? Oh yeah, we've been seeing on and off. We see something like that. I've been seeing, and your grandfather saw such and such.
Right.
And everybody who lived there, and even towns close by in that area, in the whole state, would have reported on something, or just that this is just we know what kind of bird this is because we've always seen it. It just doesn't appear and disappear. Yeah, these people go and they hunt and they fish, and they know the lay of the land, and they know all the animals. There's probably no animal or bird or fish that they haven't seen. That would be a real rarity. But something like this, they certainly would have reported on it, unless this is the Thunderbird. And now we're seeing the Thunderbird now in our time. And maybe it's an interdimensional creature, the Thunderbird. It wasn't really an animal. I say it's a bird, but it wasn't really something of flesh and blood and feathers. It's something that goes in and out. And that's why I read that the omen, it's a bad omen. So maybe it does come from another dimension. Something bad is going to happen, and then goes back again. But the fact that it didn't just appear, it was chasing all those teenagers. About how old were they?
They were married, and they were I believe in their 20s.
There you go.
Yeah,
they were young, but they were married. Okay.
Yeah,
that's odd. That's really odd.
Yeah, I mean, it was people of all ages. I mean, like Marcella, I think, was in her 30s or 40s. You had elderly farmers. You had really young kids that saw the birds. Which I don't know about you, but if I saw like a giant bird like that sitting in the tree, it would have terrified me. And again, nobody in a small town is going to come out and say, I saw 4 giant birds, with a 10-foot wingspan sitting in a tree. They just wouldn't do that. I mean, it's just, as a lark, they're just not going to.
It's too small a community. There's no way. In like a big city, you just move to another part of the city, nobody will ever see you again. Or move out of the city. That's right. If you're going to stay there, you're going to go to church there. You better not be lying.
You live and die in those towns, and it's not something that you're going to like just ad hoc
exactly.
To throw away your life and your reputation over. And you got to face your boss, you got to face your clergy, you got to face all the townspeople that you come into contact with every day. Why on earth would you make something like that up, knowing fully well that you're going to face that kind of a gauntlet, of people that you've grown up with, who are going to call you out on any BS that you do. And the sad part is that these people really, when you can hear it in both Mary and Linda's recollections, they felt like they had nowhere to turn. I mean, not even, saddest part is like I said, it resulted in one of the couples, divorcing. I think they all eventually, went their own separate ways because it just traumatized them so much. And that's why I say I really,
That something really did happen. That would
yeah. I mean, it's a lot like when
pinpoint
we were
in
talking about Phil
time.
Schneider. Like, Phil's not going to off himself, especially when he's got a daughter to live for.
Doesn't make any sense.
He's dying
It
of
doesn't
cancer.
seem he could kill himself anyway. He didn't have the strength to
Yeah.
do such a thing. It just doesn't. That didn't make any sense at all.
No, it's crazy that I mean that a lot of people don't, they don't look at some of these events, and they don't try to look at the fact that there's a human cost to this, and that some of these people, um, I know that somebody like Travis Walton, Fire on the Mountain, or Fire in the
Yes.
Sky, excuse me, Fire in the Sky. Now he's
Yes.
getting a new movie remade of Fire in the Sky, getting you deals and everything. And there's a lot of people questioning his story, even though a lot of the guys took lie detector tests. But the problem is that during all this period from the 70s up until now, he's faced nothing but, ridicule and heartbreak. Good on him. I hope he does get a book deal, and hope he does get a new book deal. I hope he does get a new movie deal. Maybe he'll get something out of what happened. But a lot of these people don't seek notoriety. They don't seek money. They don't seek fame. I think those girls and those two guys were just literally trying to tell people what had happened because they couldn't. Again, it traumatized them. And I definitely know Marcella wasn't looking for fame. She just had a baby. She's just trying to make do. And suddenly they've got all these cameras in their face, all these people from across the country knocking on their door. So after you've had this traumatic event, now you've got people banging on your house, just like the Birdman banged on your house. It's a lot like the wives of the Mercury astronauts or the Apollo astronauts. When their husbands were on their way to the moon or up into orbit, all these people, the press just descended on them. And all these ladies were trying to do was support their husbands and try to toe the line, and they just got this craziness thrown in their face. And especially at that time, anything that of a sensational nature like that, people were really critical. I mean, nowadays you can say anything and pretty much get away with it. Somebody somewhere will go, "Oh, that's great. I'll follow you." Back then, it was a really high bar. If you said I saw a Bigfoot, people are like, "What are you smoking? What are you drinking? And how soon can we get you in the sanitarium?" Nowadays it's like, "Oh, really? I'll go on you with a Sasquatch." I mean, it's not, the world's changed a lot, and people, especially now with I know I keep bringing on the Tic Tac thing and the Phoenix Lights, but these are things that a mass group of people have seen, and a large number of people now have witnessed. So it makes it a little bit more open to discuss these things, and people take it just a little bit more seriously than they have been. Whereas opposed to '60s, where you start talking little green men, or you start talking Mothman in the trees, people are going to go, maybe you should come in the car with me. There's a doctor that would like to see you. And these poor kids had nobody to turn to. All these people had nobody to turn to except the people who had witnessed it with them. And so my heart goes out to them. And then on top of that, a year, 13 months later, the bridge collapses and all these people in the towns die. The town dies, and it's just a terrible tragedy. And a lot of people are like, well, we have pictures of yes, there was a lot of witnesses that say that they had seen these things, this creature or creatures, because there were differences to each of them. Some of the reports, but there was enough consistency that it lends to either there's a population of these things or the creature could ship shaved. Who knows? But it does lead credence because there was enough similarities and enough people of really outstanding community, standing that mention these things, that I believe it. I mean, I really do. It's one of the few cases that I'll say, I can say wholeheartedly, I know they saw something of a weird nature. Maybe it was a mutated giant bird that somehow soaked up enough nitrates, went like steroids, who knows? But it none of us will know because we haven't seen it. But the people that did see it, I believe them. I do. I totally believe that they saw something that they can't explain. I don't think it was a crane. I don't think it was a heron. I don't think it was a large owl, which brings me to what we were talking about earlier about the Thunderbird. There's actually a thing now too, where they're talking about the great owl, which is a giant owl that is they think a lot of times that the Mothman was a barred owl, which because it has a large number of blood vessels in its eye, and then the with the night shine, coming back at you, it looks like just bloodshot eyes, and they think a lot of people feel that that's what this is, but I can't imagine a 6-foot owl with a 10-foot wingspan. I mean, if I saw that in the woods, I would never go back out in the woods ever again. I mean, so I'm not quite sure what they saw, but I do believe
Yeah, an owl wouldn't that big wouldn't just appear, you know. And Three Stooges here thanks you for all the great work that you did. And we have magnetic vortex resonance from watching from Los Alamos National Laboratory,
Wow.
Office of Scientific Research and Development. So he's got the NORAD hours,
Wow.
all night long. Wow.
Thank you for all the work you folks do. Amazing job.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, that's the thing is like in science is, as much as people argue about religion versus science, it's like, there's methods and methodology to science, and there's so many benefits that we've reaped from science, and all the people's health has improved, people's lives have been improved. The way in which we exchange information has just exploded. I mean, there's just so much now. Yeah, I know Three Stooges. Three Stooges says a 10-foot wing would not be large enough to lift a 6-foot tall man. That goes back to earlier what I was talking about. How does a creature without a head, how does it eat? Does it draw off of fear or spiritual energy? Does it suck it up with an ovipositor? Does it stick its claws in and suck the fluids out? I mean, no one knows how this thing eats. We don't know how it flies. Is it lighter than air, but somehow has gas propulsion? Is it made out of liquid magnets and levitates off the Earth's field? I mean, I'm joking, but you get what I'm saying. When people would describe how this thing would unfold its wings out and just fly straight up, that's why it got the nickname Mothman, because they were kind of making fun of it from Batman. But when you see like videos of people, like newsreels for people, Mad Dog says it eats with its butthole, maybe a bivalve, like a clam. Yeah, it's a bottom feeder. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, or maybe
the head is lower,
like a big, amoeba, and it just absorbs its food and slowly digests it. I don't know. I mean, we don't know what if it is a biological, a true creature. We don't know. It could have been something like we said earlier. It could be if it was a mutant crane, it was deformed by all of the TNT development, all the explosive developments during the Second World War. And it was just a subsequent mutation. Maybe it was a creature that was born without a beak, or maybe its head didn't form fully, and then maybe it was a lot larger. But then again, too, maybe it was towards the end of its life. I mean, we don't know. Somebody says Mothman doesn't like South Park, but yeah, it does answer. I mean, it does bring up a lot more questions than it does answers. Because
it's like, where did it come from? Even if it migrated from somewhere else, nobody saw it before. Nobody saw it afterwards.
It's really interesting because there was a story I stumbled on, and this was a week ago, where herons had flown here. And this particular type of heron was not natural to here. It was way outside of its migratory zone, but it wasn't just one. It was like a bunch of them. So, again, it maybe that goes back to what ornithologists were saying about perhaps it was a bird that migrated out of its zone. But I find it really hard to believe you're just not going to see a 6-foot bird with, with a 10-foot wingspan. I mean, it's like, and I can see, I've seen birds with really large wingspans, but just, when somebody mistakes a creature for a small plane, that this, you're not dealing with a barn owl here. It's, or even a barred owl. It's just, it's either something supernatural, or it's a creature that we just haven't come across yet, or somebody's been doing drugs. But these people were not the kind of people to do that. And that's,
they had children. You said there are families. There were 2 families.
Yeah, I mean, there's one lady who talks about in her recollections. It's like they interviewed her. I want to say it was 2011. Some people who are way better at this than I am, real actual Mothman researchers, um, they went back and interviewed some of the people in the town. And I think people still go back there frequently to interview the people, the children's children, the children of the children. Um, but they talked to one lady, and she said it had destroyed her life. Like, just talking about it, people shunned her. Her friends stopped calling. Um, Her preacher turned his back on her. Her husband told her, shut your mouth, don't talk about it anymore. If you do, I'm going to leave you. Her kids were embarrassed. Her kids didn't want to talk about it. I think even Marcella said, like, her kids had said, don't, before she died, she gave an interview and said, my kids don't want me talking about it. So it's not like they were doing this for the fame, and so I keep saying it, but it's literally one of those cases where I go, man, it's not, like sometimes you read accounts and it's a little sketchy, and right from the outset that the stories aren't matching up. Things just are not quite on the up and up. And it goes back to, I remember somebody last week said they thought Bob Lazar was a faker, but I brought up that fact that, like we were talking about, where George Knapp had tried to find out about his past, and somebody had literally gone back in and wiped it out. They were trying to get him for tax evasion and for running a prostitution brothel, and they couldn't find information enough on his employment. And it was because, somebody had been messing with his records. So there's things like that kind of, not always, you still, like I said, you still run into the high strangeness, but when you have police officers, military pilots, airline pilots, these are people who could lose their jobs. They could lose their pensions.
That's right. It does depend on your sanity. Once
and I mean, it's,
go
they could lose their
insane,
clearances. They could lose, their security clearances. You got people from private corporations that could get in trouble for whistleblowing. I mean, there's so many different areas of this. Why on earth would you put your family and putting food on the table at risk over saying something like this? And it's the same with these people from a small town. Why on earth would these people ever, in a small town like that, come forth and say something like, I saw a bird man last night, I'm going to be on TV? I mean, it's just not going to happen, And so, it does give a lot of, like I said, to me, it gives a lot of credence to what these people saw, that something really affected them so drastically and traumatically. It affected them for the rest of their natural lives. Yeah. And they had to talk about it. They had to tell somebody about it. And two, I think a lot of times, like, I remember reading the Mulletts and the Scarberries, they were just going to, like, forget about it because it scared them so bad, but they were just going to keep driving into town. But when the creature jumped over the back of their car and took the dog's carcass with it, they said, this thing could actually be dangerous to everybody. So we probably,
exactly,
at CC's farm, we need to go, into town and tell the sheriff, tell Johnson that something's up, and we, get somebody out here and try to find this thing. And what it did, though, is it just knocked off a firestorm across, the whole country. People were coming to Point Pleasant and with cameras in their face and hunting parties. The sheriff Johnson had to actually put out a statement and say, do not go to the TNT area because, somebody might get shot. And so it was just kind of crazy that all of this happened. Three Stooges said that he said, I could see the condor as the Mothman. Yeah, I mean, they talked about all different kinds of large birds, but again, it's still, the problem is that at least I read at least 6 or 7 people's accounts where they were up to 87 to 105 miles an hour, even on a good draft. I just don't see how condor can keep up with a car, especially in that day and age when, large V8 engines and so forth. I just don't see how they could keep up with that unless they were caught somehow in the draft, which is possible, or thermals, whatever. But again, and there were people who described these things as large birds. So that, again, it doesn't rule out that they weren't some kind of large bird, but the kids were describing something altogether totally different. So I don't know what it was.
But you said that an elderly woman saw it last at the end.
No, her mother was one of the last reports that I read. I didn't read any reports after that. And again, there's people out there who follow this full time. who have whole pages devoted to it. You know, I've dipped my fingers in a lot of different things just because I was trying to find out the truth for some of the things that I witnessed, um, and to try to make sense of it for myself. And this was just one of those things that really spoke to me because you know, these, like I said, these people really were trying to find answers for what happened to them. Um, and the mom, which I just think it's so weird how that dovetail. I mean, yes, you have a guy digging graves for his father-in-law is the first person technically to witness it, and the last person to witness it that at least that I can find. And again, any Mothman experts out there, because there are Mothman experts out there. If you know of anyone's after her, you know, the sure cases after hers, I would love to hear about it. But that's the last one that I could find on record of witnessing it. And I just think that's so weird how that dovetails, you know, with her mom being one of the last people to mention. Then again, it could have just been some crap that Keel made up. I don't know, but it, you know, it was from her mother, and her mother did say that, you know, there was a lot of stories, especially from like the families and the parents of the kids, talking about how damaged they were, how they just wanted their kids back. They didn't want them, you know, taking pills, keeping the lights on. They were afraid to put on certain things because of white noise, and they were afraid that they would hear that noise. They saw those eyes, you know, all the time. And that's one of the things I thought was really strange is that everybody, if it was just a bird, and don't get me wrong, birds can give you some creepy looks, but anytime you were like if you can go to an aviary where there's owls, hang with the owls for a little while. They'll creep you out. And the noises they make are unearthly. If you've never heard certain bird calls or vocalizations, you know, you probably would be terrified out of your mind if you heard a loon at night, you know, or a, you know, shrieking loon or something like that. But Three Stooges asks, it says, country boys always carry. Why didn't anyone take a shot at it? I think that's why Sheriff Johnson was so afraid, because like I said earlier, and like Felina and I were saying earlier, folks out there, they know wildlife. And so they were all packing, and they had hunting parties.
Yeah, that's right. There's no fear. You know, you go into the woods, there's no fear because you pretty much know every animal that there is.
Now I would be like a big scaredy cat. But when I was younger, I could go out and stay in the woods for days. I'd sleep in the woods. I had no problem. Now I'd be like, oh, what is that? What is that? You know, yeah, I've gotten soft as I got older. But when I was younger, lived to go. You know, I went from being a city kid to a country kid. Now I'm back to being a city kid, but at the time, I'd love to go out in the woods. I love to walk. I love where we lived. I loved, you know, being a scout and being out in the country. And just, I remember for Order of the Arrow, you know, being dropped off for our trials. You can't talk, you know, for the period that you're doing all the things that you're doing. And the first night they take you out in the middle of the woods, and they literally, I was what they call the anchor. I was the last person dropped off. I was like a mile and a half from anybody out in the middle of nowhere. And I remember it was just dead quiet. And I got a little spooked by that at first, but then I was just like, no, I'm going to sleep and have a good sleep. And I just put my poncho over me and went. One of the best nights I've ever slept. It was me, knife, and a poncho, and that was it, and a shovel, and that was it. I slept like a baby. In the middle of the night, I got woken up by a deer walking by, but that was about it. And it was peaceful. But now, knowing what I know and seeing the things that I've seen, I'll be lucky if I'll ever go back in the woods again. But I love the woods. I love the country. But I imagine when you have again, it's like I said earlier, when you have people who do something that they love all their life, like my friend, I call him my friend, but the acquaintance I made in Boone that time, that said that he saw a Sasquatch. This is a guy who hunted his whole life, like all of his life. He had been a hunter, and he stopped hunting because he was scared to go in the woods because of what he saw. He said it looked too much like a person, and I believe him. You know, and people can make fun of him, you know, but, you know, maybe, like I said, maybe he saw a big dude that was a little scruggly and whatever, but I don't think so. Not from his description. So, and people have been talking about those things for generations after generation after generation. So, you know, who am I to judge some kids from West Virginia talking about a Mothman? I mean, you know, I just think that it's sad that their lives were ruined like this, you know, by the attention that this brought and what it did to them, did to their marriages, did to their lives. It just tore them apart. So it's just sad.
And usually these are the types of people you call the salt of the earth, because they're full of common sense.
Oh
They're
yeah,
not afraid of anything. They'll sleep out in the woods if they need to, because they know the woods. They know it all.
It's like when we were coming up, the song "Country Boy Can't Survive" by Hank Williams Jr. Yeah, I mean, and also too, we're the reason a lot of those cars were developed was because of Detroit and large bore engines, but also too is because all the shiners modified their engines. So when all the people that love NASCAR now, city folk that love NASCAR, well, you can thank all of the country boys that I grew up with, because it was all from run and shine. They had to outrun the police cars that already had the to quote the Blues Brothers, the cop shocks, cop tires, and cop engine. Yeah, they had to have large engines to outrun the interceptors, the police vehicles that could catch them run and shine on all these back roads. And so they would modify their engines. And apparently, that particular place, the TNT area in Point Pleasant, was because it had long, straight roads, and that they would use, and kids would go out there and drag race. So that's where the drag racing was. So from what I understand, Roger really loved his car like a lot, and that was like his baby. And so much so, I think it was like a 1952 black Chevrolet Bel Air that when they had the divorce, Linda, that was the first thing she asked for, because she knew that was his baby. So I just think that's,
Oh, that hurts.
Yeah. You got to cut them where it hurt, but yeah. Hell hath no fury.
Yeah. A woman scorned, yeah. That's true. But the fact that it affected them mentally for the rest of their lives, it'd be so much easier not to say something, but you naturally, your parents, you're concerned about your children. There's something out there that could hurt someone else's children, God forbid, not just the parents. You have to tell somebody. But it'd been so much easier to say. If it was a lie, then you just say nothing.
I think that's why Marcella's story can be so hard, because it was, more than anybody else's. If you think about the first sighting, I think Kenneth Duncan, the grave digger with his friends flying, and they're digging this grave for a family member who had died. That's terrifying. The Scarberries and the Millettes at the TNT area, that's terrifying. But absolutely, for me, I honestly think that Marcella's was more terrifying than any of them, because she's visiting family that lives there, that lives near this abandoned place. It's like a large facility that's just shut down and rotting away, and they have to live out there. That's where their house is located next to it. So she goes out here with her family in a place that she thinks is safe, and she's taking her baby out of the car, and enjoying a cigarette, whatever arguments want to be made for health, back then, that's what people did. That's how they relaxed. And she turns around, and here's this 6-foot thing with glowing eyes, squawking at her and shrieking, and then it follows her, and she falls and lands on her baby. And by the way, I'm not blaming her. I'm just saying that'll give you an idea of how terrified she was when she drops her own flesh and blood child, and then is in such a state of horror, she falls on the child, because it tells you she saw something that's definitely not a crane. The people, like Felina said, people know, animals, and there's people out there who can tell you what a certain call is and what it means. They can tell you what a track is. Yeah.
Every bird's got a different call. Every animal has a different sound. That's right.
And when something sheds, whether it's a snake, they can tell you what kind of snake. They can tell you how many scales the thing's got, how it hunts, where it's
exactly
what the warrens are. I learned a lot from people that I grew up with. Even what scat is, and and I hate to see what Mothman scat would be made of, but they would go in there and pick it apart with no problem and tell you what that animal had eaten that night, where it was roosting at. So I'm sure when they were out hunting for Mothman, they had some really dedicated, really solid hunters that were in that group looking for that thing. And there's some reports that people saw it. Like I said, I think it was up to 105 reports for the thing. And it's really fascinating if you read those police reports, because literally it's almost like a lot of people gave the same descriptions, but what they would say about the vocalizations of the creature was really interesting. Like, someone would say that it was like a record player starting up. Some would say it was like an alarm going off. Three Stooges just asked me, was any hair or feathers or tracks found? Yeah, the tracks.
That's
Miss
a good
Scarberry,
question.
Mrs. Scarberry said that the tracks they found were like two horseshoes, but she never said how they were arranged. Was it like an M, like McDonald's? Was it back to back, like two C's back to back? Was it like a W? She never said how it looked, and no one ever said if they made castings. No one said if they ever made photos. I'm sure probably Keel's books. I didn't read all. He's got like so many books. As a kid, I used to see those things on the shelves, and I would pick up one or two there. Usually the ones about flying saucers, but I never had a chance to pick up. I read the Mothman prophecies like years ago, but I cannot remember if it had anything about the tracks. And now that I know this, now I'm like kind of obsessed about that. And that's one of the things I'm going to try to
Yeah, the
follow up.
tracks is the first thing you do is you make plaster copies of the Trevor first photograph them, and then put plaster in them. And that will, if it's that as big as they describe, the feet needs to be able, especially if this creature ran after them.
Right.
This
Should be tracks
creature's got
everywhere.
feet that can support the body
Yeah,
and not just outrun them.
She did say like a horseshoe. She said it was like two horseshoes put together, only smooth. That's how she put it. And I think what she means is she's talking about the wrangles, which are like the little things on the end that you use to drive the no, they're not nails. I forgot what they call them now. Anyway, long story short, it's what you use to actually put it onto the horse's feet, but the wrangles. I think she was saying that it was smooth, so it was almost like a U shaped. But she said it was like two horseshoes that only smooth put together. That's what her exact description was. But we don't know. They apparently found it at the foundry. They found it at the power plant. They found it in front of Marcella's home. They found it in front of the Smith's home. So there were tracks all over the place, and I just don't know why they didn't make. Let me see if I can find it. I don't know why they didn't make castings of this thing, so that would tell them something about how this thing stood, how much it might have weighed.
No scientists went out there, or anybody that's
I think only Keel, and then a half-hearted attempt by people making fun of them. That was about the only.
Or did they start? When did they start making plaster casts of Bigfoot tracks?
Oh, I think a lot of that had come from criminology then, because they would make casts of shoes. That way they could track down the type of shoe treads and tire tracks. So that way they know where the tires were manufactured or where they purchased the shoes from, how tall the person was, how deep they set in. A lot of that was, it might have been Ness. I can't remember who exactly that started all that, but I know that was something that had started.
Somebody started doing it for Bigfoot, right? For some reason, nobody thought of doing it.
They copied it from police, from police work though, where they would make casts of feet or impressions, whether they would make tire impressions and things like that, in an attempt to find a criminal. Three Stooges says that sounds like an insect foot to me. Yeah, what's interesting is like when you read some of the stories about UFO. Stories about mantids, they always describe them as being two horseshoes put together. And again, that kind of echoed in my mind about some of the discussions that people had about giant mantids leaving tracks outside their homes. And again, it begs the question of why has nobody made casts of these things? They just say, oh, we saw tracks, and then it just drops. And you're like, did anybody take a picture? Which no one carried cameras back then. It wasn't like now where you have these high quality ultra high definition, which is another argument people have about all these cryptids, is like, why can no one get a good picture? I think last week in someone's backyard in Washington or California, they had a picture of Bigfoot, but it was like a big blurry blob on the side of a hill, and people are like, how can you not take a good picture? I think like Megan's phone, she could probably take pictures of the space shuttle with that thing and let you know what the name tag says on it. So I don't know why you can't get a good picture of.
Well, it might have been a bear, so they just kind of blurred it a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah, I was trying to find where they said where she said it was. I think it was. It had to have been Linda. I'm pretty sure that said that it was the like horseshoes. Sorry, I was just looking through here to see if I could find it for y'all. Yeah, it says Wednesday we went up again to the building and found these off tracks around the building. They were shaped like horseshoes, only smooth, and that's literally the only description you get of them. Let me see Mary's report. Here we go. We were all looking around the place and found some funny prints like a double hoof print of a horse. Then we all returned home. So a double hoof print of a horse. So it just begs
Well, if it's a hoof print and a horse's print with
you
a
might be
shoe
looking at
is
old
different.
Yeah. It's yeah, but it was double. She said it was doubled up, which, you know, animals entirely could have been of like you said. I'm one of those people. I'm super. I know we were talking earlier about jokes about the X-Files, but I'm one of those people who like. In fact, I think there was an episode on the other day, and one of the things I always hated about Scully was like she could have a saucer land, an alien come up and impregnate her, and she would always go. But Mulder, we really don't have any evidence. But then you've got Mulder who would believe that, you know, potato chip, you know, with an alien head on it. Oh, this is a sign. No, you know, I'm really ultra skeptical about a lot of things, but I haven't seen what I've seen. I'm not so skeptical that I don't believe it. I'm just saying what I do is I research it when it could be other things. But if it's something that's pretty cut and dried, then, you know, it's like the old saying, you know, once the impossible has been eliminated, you know, then you know, there's other quotes all that say basically the same thing. But once you've eliminated those things, which, you know, the impossible, then what you're left with is the possible. So it's like I'm kind of one of those people, like I want to kick the tires, and I just don't understand, like when you see something like this, why you, if it's something that profound and that terrifying, and it's something that's out in the community, why you might want to make at least copies of the tracks at that time. But it may have been at that time, perhaps that's not something that they did in West Virginia, you know. But
You probably didn't have anything like that before. But when did they start making the prints of Bigfoot? So I think maybe what I'm thinking is maybe once the first person that had the idea, let's make casts of the prints of the foot, then that was in the consciousness of people, that right away they would have said, they did it for Bigfoot, we'll do it for Mothman. I'm just wondering if maybe at that point nobody had heard of making, or had making plastic casts.
Sure, the first time, like I remember hearing
photographs, photographs.
That when one of the first things they did, like I think it was out west, is when they would have large cats that would hunt, or you know, or wolves. A lot of times they would make castings sometimes to keep, you know, as a record of when predatory animals were in an area feeding on cattle. They also too. I know that a lot of times when I was growing up, the rangers would make castings of animals just as examples to show to people. But what I was often told was that they got that from criminology or from anthropology. Like whenever they would make castings of certain tracks that had been found, they would use plaster of Paris to make copies of that, so that they could bring that back to the lab for study, so that you could pick up things like dermal patterns, you know, claw marks, the depth of the print to show you how heavy the animal was, the way that the splay was, that kind of thing. And I think the first time I ever saw like a cryptid was when Sir Edmund Hillary, I think it was, held up a casting of Bigfoot, of a Yeti, that I ever saw, like a cryptid casting. And I think I saw once of the Jersey Devil, like hoof prints supposedly off of they looked to me a lot like a goat print, just saying. And that's, yeah, I think Three Stooges is right. I just remember that Hillary was the first time, Sir Edmund Hillary was the first time I remember seeing a cryptid actually have a footprint made. Was in the late 60s, I think it was, early 70s. because I think his expedition was somebody out there correct me, but I think it was some in the 70s. So I think that was just slightly after Mothman period, but I'm sure somebody out there was making casts of things before that. But that was the first time that I personally ever remember seeing a cryptid. Because back in the 70s when I was a little kid growing up, cryptids were all the rage. You had Bigfoot, you had the Loch Ness monster. And a lot of those photos of the Loch Ness monster, I think, with the exception of the head, which they still believe, I think, is a log, and then the flipper, which they said was actually an echo of what they call a ripple echo. Even those have kind of been debunked, but people are still arguing about them. But all the other really famous photos of Nessie have been debunked now. Like some of them were proven to be toys and hoaxes.
Yes.
It's not that I don't, again, I'm not that
Just
I'm
the
not open
head.
to Nessie being real, but also too when they're doing DNA tests of, the lock and it's like 99.9 eel DNA coming back up, that tells you we're probably dealing with a large eel. But again, it goes back to the argument: are we dealing with a supernatural creature? Are we dealing with a real flesh and blood creature? We don't know. So until we see it and there's definitive proof. But one of the things that's really, it's kind of, I was telling Megan, it's sort of like spoliation of evidence. It's like with all those documentaries about Mothman, some of them are really dead on, really well made, really, really good. Because they stick with the facts, and then others just go off on mass wild speculation, and the problem is that it spoils the waters. It's like all these people who make up these creepy pastas and stuff about Mothman. They make people believe that the Mothman was seen before 9/11, and now somebody's out there photoshopping. John Knoll, he's getting $1 off of every one of these, but even he's probably like, that's not what he intended Photoshop to be used for. Enhancing your family photos versus creating a hoax online. The problem is now seeing is not believing, especially in the era of deep fakes. So if somebody actually captured footage of a Yeti family, breaking rocks and eating food, nobody would believe it because makeup effects now are so advanced and digital effects are so advanced now that people can do that stuff in their own homes to match the big studios. So it sucks because this is a time now, when we've got more cameras out there and eyeballs than we've ever had probably in the history of mankind, and satellites are surveying areas of the world that have never been surveyed before in higher definition and in higher bandwidth. And yet, we're just not turning up the evidence for these things. So it either means that, it's mass hysteria, it's a hoax, or these things are really good at hiding. So time will tell, I guess.
Well, animals they have to, it's a survival thing, When I've seen I've seen deer in the neighborhood, in the yard next to mine, and there was a fence there, so the deer couldn't come into my yard. And then cutting over the train tracks, I've seen a deer. But usually when I go into the woods, if I've ever hiked, never saw a deer. Camped, never saw a deer.
Yeah, they're there.
Yeah, they have to be there, but they know when they hear humans around. They know how to hide. Well, I guess not enough, because the hunters do find them to shoot them. But they're very intelligent, these animals that have survived for so long, that they know how to hide. This it's almost like whatever this creature was might have been looking for food and wanted a human. I mean, if he was that big, he wanted something that maybe eat half of it or a quarter and make jerky out of it for the rest of the season.
Yeah, there's never
possible.
been an example of one of these creatures fully on attacking anyone, but they did intimidate, they did fear, they did follow, they did, and like we were saying earlier, they tried to get, he tried to get into the house, or she. What I love is that we're calling him Mothman, but how do we know? I mean, how do you sex a moth creature?
That's right. You
You
don't
know,
know.
as
They
far as we
have
know,
been
nobody's
filmed.
trying to tell you. Nobody knows. You know, there were no breasts on this thing. We don't know, but still, how do we know that it wasn't a
Yeah.
female? We don't know what it was, but it's called the Mothman, but it could be a female. It could be, you know, we could have been looking at both mature members of the species. We could have been looking at young members of the species, because there are one of the things I think is really interesting when I was talking earlier about the differences in accounts. You do get the same kind of wingspan. You do get the same kind of eye shine, um, the red eye shine. But what you get are differences in coloration. You know, some people describe it as brown, some describe it as tan, some describe it as gray or off gray, some describe it as solid snow white, some describe it as feathery, some described it as leathery. With wings like a bat, and others said, you know, and that could have been terror making their mind, you know, the whole thing again about pareidolia and making their mind fill out those blanks that they couldn't see. But the one thing that's strange too is also that one lady said that it had a head, but it was really grotesque. And then everybody else says no, there was no head, or other people say there was
Depends
sort
on
of a
what you
headish
can see in
bump.
the dark.
Yeah, I
Was
mean
he in
it's
the
like,
woods? Wasn't in full light.
oh, they saw it in several different. I mean, that's what I'm saying. It was seen in all different kinds of light. It was seen at night. It was seen, and that's one of the things that we were when I was reading the account earlier from Linda when she said she couldn't understand this thing had an avoidance for light. Like when it was would get to the like the midway point of the car, it would always turn back because it didn't want to get in front of the headlights. Anytime that it was in the headlights, it would, you know, dart out of it. Um, when the sheriff put his light from the car, and back then cars a lot of times, which they still do now, had really powerful searchlights on a bar that they could turn in the direction. When they turned it on, where she saw the eyes at, all they saw was a column of smoke where the creature had been standing. Smoke and dust is what she described it as if it just leapt up and got out of the light because it was light averse, you know, and it basically was trying to always avoid the light, which a moth generally goes towards light. So, you know, the name is kind of a misnomer, but it tried to stay away from any bright light, you know. And as far as I know, you know, Three Stooges says that anxiety can make everyone see something different. That's exactly right. Because when you're
It's
terrified,
true. Like when the
you know, if you try to
Titanic
explain
went
during a
down.
bank robbery, what was he wearing, and you know, or she wearing, and one person's like he had a tan belt on, another person say no, I think it was more light blue. You know, you're going to get like the poor police have to sit here and try to sift between all of
It's
these
what they're
descriptions.
concentrating on in that
Yeah,
terror. Because when the Titanic went down, there was lots of people who saw the ship go down, and some people said it broke in two, and some people just said it went down like it didn't break in two. And they were all there, and they were all looking at it. I can imagine being in that cold water. You might start to hallucinate also. You know, if you're drifting in that cold and you're just afraid and exhausted,
that
you know, you don't
you
know
jarred
what
my
you're
memory.
feeling.
There was something that I thought was really interesting too. I was watching a video interview where they were giving tours of the TNT area, and one of the tour guides mentioned that the place had been used for nuclear bomb production. The only problem is that I couldn't find any information about that or any records of that. But one of the things you do notice in ufology is that anytime that nuclear power is involved, which is where I think a lot of the whole Chernobyl myths started with the script writers for the movie. But a lot of times with UFOs or any kind of supernatural events, sometimes cryptids, they always seem to be around like nuclear energy. But I can't find any record of that actually occurring in Point Pleasant, so I don't think that that's factual. But I thought it was interesting that that tour guide said that. So maybe they knew something that the rest of us don't know. But it's weird that this creature shows up in a place, and UFOs supposedly showed up all in this town. Um, you know, because a lot of times whenever there's missile silos, aircraft carriers, ballistic subs, that kind of thing. Usually, that's where you see a lot of UFO activity. Nuclear power stations in France, you know, it's really interesting too sometimes when you see stuff like that, because it makes you wonder, like, is that what they're monitoring? Is that what, you hear that a lot where they like, I've talked about it a lot, where they will cut nuclear silos on and off at will, and then you've got like the whole Rendlesham Forest thing in the UK, where that was a base where they had some of the nuclear weapons housed during the 80s. During Roswell, you've got all of the nuclear testing that went on in the desert. So it's like it's something that goes hand in hand with UFO lore. And John Keel was really strong on the whole UFO lore of that area, whereas most of the townspeople were trying to deal with this crazy thing that they see that looks like a giant moth flying around, flying human. That's what they were dealing with. And he's talking about cattle mutilations and teleportation, and in his words, strange Asian men in black cars driving around terrorizing people. That was his exact words. Talking about the Men in Black that he and his fellow co-writer came up with to describe the Men in Black. But it was just he talked a lot about that high strangeness of the other events that surrounded the Mothman phenomena. But he said that he believed that it was just a energy force that a sentient energy force that basically would take any form at will, and that's what he thought the Mothman was.
It's an interesting take. I think that it's interesting that the first person who saw it was digging a grave. Do you think that there's sometimes there's portals, and that's how things from the other side come through?
That person that looks at like the weirdest stuff, because you never know what connections you're going to find. I mean, and even 60, 70 years later, somebody can come up with a theory that might help to explain something else, or you notice a trend that other, like West Virginia is known for already having a creature that has red glowing eyes. So it's like, here's another creature with red glowing eyes. So like, what is the link to that? Or is it just is it not a linked phenomenon? We were talking the last time you and I talked, we talked about De Glock, the supposed German, the red mercury powered bell that could travel through time. Well, let's say, was the Kecksburg UFO, is it related to the De Glock? Is it not related? We don't know, but it's very curious that both of them are described as big objects with writing on the side, and both happen to be, recovered in a similar manner, with writing on the side, matching the same exact physical description, only decades apart. So that's Three Stooges says West Virginia is known for The Walking Dead. But yeah, it's just a situation where I think that's one of the things that Mary Hyre, I admire her a lot more than I do the other two guys, because she literally was she was about the facts. She was about like presenting people in a favorable light without making fun of them. It was just like a matter of fact way of saying X person described diamond-shaped UFOs flying over his farm. It wasn't like she tried to sensationalize it. She was just trying to get at a truth of finding out, like, it. She started out thinking it was going to be something that was just going to be like a really personal column. I was talking about Where the Waters Mingle. I'm sorry, her column, Where the Waters Mingle. She thought that it would just be like something where they would cover birthdays and happenings in the town and that kind of thing. And here we are, with a Mothman, UFOs, silver cylinder ships, Men in Black, teleportation, time bending, people having premonitions. So this poor lady was trying to report this stuff, and all these people are anxiety ridden and scared and trying to figure out what was going on. And it was just a really crazy time in the history of the United States, when a lot of upheaval was occurring. And so she was basically just trying to document these things, these strange occurrences that were happening in Point Pleasant. And meanwhile, Keel and his cohort are off on a tangent, just like, well, I believe that this is what this is, and these are my theories, and please buy my book. And, I just admire her a lot more because she if it wasn't for her documenting some of these instances and names and dates and addresses, I think a lot of people wouldn't be able to go back and do the archaeology of the work to try to find out what occurred and where it occurred and what are the conditions in that area during that time. Because like even we're talking almost 50 plus years on, 54 years on, the landscape's different, the town's different. A lot of these places, like I remember watching when I think it was Linda went back to the TNT area. She had pretty bad PTSD from even at that time in 2011, 2012, whenever it was, going back to the spot. She said, I don't want to be here any longer, because she still felt like it might return. But one of the things she commented on was how much it had grown up. And by grown up, I mean that the vegetation had taken over. She said the place looked like a funeral home. It was just, she said it's haunting now. She said even then it was bad, but it's much worse now. She's more terrified of it now than she was then, which, that says a lot. It's like she never really got over it. So it's like, it makes you wonder, how could something traumatize somebody for over 54 years, So it's pretty amazing that, or, maybe less back then, but you know what I mean? It was a pretty considerable amount of time that had occurred. So,
I bet none of them went camping anymore. Some people can see those things and they're right out there and they want to catch it, right? But I bet after they were so scared, that would also lend credence to their story. If they were comfortable at one time being outside, being at night, being in the middle of the woods, sleeping in the middle of the woods, and then after that, never again. That would lend credence to their story.
That's what I mean. Like the people that you see that are in fear. Another case that I always thought was really interesting was I bring it up a lot, and I'm sorry, one of these days I'm going to get the hard information on this, so I don't keep telling y'all about this, but it was a school in South Africa where there was a mass sighting by the children at the school where a UFO landed in the schoolyard, while the only adult that was there was a teacher at one of the candy stands there on the playground. But the kids were so traumatized by this event, and the way that they all described it, it was one of those things where when you watch the video and you see the kids recounting it, they're just like, if it was just something where it was mass hysteria, I joke a lot about how my brother and we would be scared of a commercial and we would run from the back of the room, from the house. That's one thing. You get over it and you laugh at it, and it's not something with these kids. One of the kids, I think, is now, obviously they're in their 20s now or something like that, 20s or 30s. I think she changed her name to Blue or something. She's an artist. She's one of the only kids that actually talks about the event, does art about it. But even now you can look in her eyes and you can see the terror there in her face. And when you watch the video of these kids, it's kind of like how I was trying to make sense of what the hell did I just see, and how am I supposed to live normally after seeing something like that? Because I know that thing's out there, and I know these things are out there. So what do I do now moving forward to try to live my life normally when people are talking about buff and champagne paper at work, and I'm sitting here thinking there's people out there with no eyes, or there's people, shadow people. It's it's different for me than it is, and for you, and for anybody who's seen stuff. I mean, people who have visitations from their dead relatives in the middle of the night that appear at the end of their bed. So what do you do when you go into work the next day? Oh, I saw grandma. She looked good. It's not something that you're going to talk to people about. But when you see it in people's eyes, it's like the 1,000-yard stare of sometimes that. And these kids had it. These kids were just terrified out of their minds. So when I was watching Miss Scarberry at that time, and they were interviewing her, she just looked like, and there's people who, do the fake panic, but she was literally terrified of her mind. She's like, I'm ready to get out of here. I can't stay here. And there's been soldiers from Vietnam who saw what could technically be called a Mothman, and other creatures as well, that when you hear them talk about it, again, what on earth is a veteran from the Vietnam War gonna do to try to bring ridicule on their head to, you know, to tell these kind of stories? They're just telling them because they feel like somebody has to know about these things. Or, you know, the guy that I met that talked about Bigfoot, why in the hell would he ever bring that up in a bar with a stranger that he's never met yet, but just because I was willing to talk to him? And it's, you know, you could tell he missed being out there. He missed doing the things that he liked doing, but he was scared and he didn't have anybody to talk to about it. And so when you see people like that, it just makes you go,
Yeah.
yeah, it could be a mistaken case of identity of something else. But Three Stooges said just smoke pot. Um, probably did. Three Stooges. I think he
He
partook of
wants to
the.
know when the show
And
and
I
the
know I
ant
look like it,
people.
but I can't handle anything. Megan knows if I drink more milk, I go straight to sleep. You know,
Oh,
my terror is long gone. I just stay at home and sleep when I get off work. Um, but no, when you see those kids' eyes, it's that's, I don't know how to explain it. It just hits you right in the heart because there's one little girl, you know, and she's saying that these visions are coming to her head. And there's been and I cannot remember the psychologist's name. He's a really famous psychologist. It'll hit me probably about 3 o'clock in the morning tonight. But he's a real famous. He's dead now. He got hit by a car in under really suspicious circumstances. But he was a documentarian on this particular incident. He interviewed all the kids both separately, together. You know, they accused him of leading the kids with questions, but the kids, like, really, even years later, said, "No, we're just telling you what happened." Apparently, when those beings landed, they were speaking to the kids telepathically, but it was like really fast, and each of them was getting different images. Like, one kid was getting images of people dying without air, another kid was getting um, images of fish dying, the oceans dying, and they were all being told that it was humans' fault and they needed to stop it. And they kept hearing a whistling noise in their ears, this weird music that they said the music was what scared them in their faces. They said these eyes were just mean and dead. That's what they described it as. And these kids were terrified out of their minds. And so they ran screaming to, you know, the lady that was running the candy stand, screaming and crying. It was like, you know, like 30 or 40 kids doing that. So most of the time the parents said, you know, I think it's just one kid made up a story or pretended to be an alien that scared them. And they could tell they were shaking so hard. They were really terrified out of their minds. And they realized that we got a problem here. Something really bad happened. So they sent security forces to look around the perimeter of the school. Because at that time it was in the wilds. Just to make sure there weren't any people there. And they didn't find anything. And so that's when they called in some specialists to come in, psychologists and people to come talk to these kids because they were really traumatized in the school. The parents called into the school saying, "What happened? What did you do?" These kids were scared out of their minds, and it wasn't the school that they just thought they were out playing and during recess. And it's one of the most interesting cases I've ever seen because the kids are just, you look into their eyes when they're recounting this, and they're just scared to death, you know. So that's what I'm saying. When you see something like that, it makes you realize, yes, it could be a lizard. It could have been, you know, some farmer out there playing around with them with a head mask on, but I don't think so. You know, they farmers are not going to be telepathic. Lizards aren't going to be telepathic. Well, maybe they are. I don't know. But I'm just saying it doesn't, none of the normal answers match. So obviously you're dealing with something that doesn't fit that pattern, and you're going to have to open up a whole new toolbox to try to deal with what just occurred and try to help those kids and get to the root of what happened and find the truth of what happened. And they never did. I mean, it's still, again, that's why it's called the paranormal, because it doesn't fit the normal paradigm of what our lives revolve around. So if you've witnessed that, anybody out there now, or Felina or me, you witness, I don't know, say a kaiju walks through your city and only 5 people see it. You 5 people are probably going to be the only people in the whole world, at least at that time. If it never happens again, you're going to be the only 5 people who've ever had that experience of watching a kaiju walk through it. So now you're going to have to try to go back to your normal life of, you know, can you take out the trash, honey? And your boss saying, Bob, I'd like you to come in and do a couple bit, you know, I need to get those TP reports out. And meanwhile, all you're thinking is that thing is out there somewhere and it could come back at any time. I don't know what the hell it was. I would love to know what it was. and you're stuck for the rest of your life like that. And that's what people who undergo paranormal experiences, when they try to relate to people who haven't had them, it's difficult. Yeah. So, I was just reading. Three Stooges says, "Has anyone ever went to the school site and tested for radiation? And if plants growing, almost always, even now, plants won't grow where UFO land." I do think they said that there is a patch just outside the school where the kids said that they saw the creatures, and the craft is where nothing will grow. Everything else has become heavily forested.
And then they might find radiation or something.
Yeah,
they test the soil or.
Yeah, it's always interesting because, like, for and even during Keel mentioned, there were like several instances for cattle mutilations in West Virginia, and there were areas where they would find saucer shaped, like areas where something had sat down. They would find vortex patterns in the grass that didn't match up to any known wind or animal patterns, nesting patterns, and things like that you see all the time. Now, crop circles is one of those things that I argue with people left and right over. I don't believe in crop circles because I've seen people make crop circles. So that's one of those things where I get into arguments with people about. I'm just not into that kind of thing because you can take a board and go out and make a crop circle any day of the week, and yet people just say this is like far advanced.
The patterns are very intricate.
It's because the people making them are really incredibly good mathematicians and really smart people to do that stuff at night before the farmers come and shoot them in the butt with birdshot. But it's amazing. I'm not doubting how amazing it is. It's fantastic as an art form. It's beautiful. But I just don't, but they say there's magnetic variations in the wheat. There's, and like I said, I'm open to that. I'm open to looking up and Three Stooges. I think you probably are the only one watching. I've bored everybody else.
There's a couple more. but bless you, Three Stooges. Bless you.
Yeah, bless
you.
You.
Can always count on Three Stooges.
But yeah, it's just one of those things where, again, what does the science say, and then what does it back up? We've got the other people.
Hello there, Peace.
Yeah, I apologize for the randomness of this week's show, folks. It's been kind of like really exhausted this week from work. So, and I've been sick. So,
Oh, so sorry to hear that. Truth,
luckily, but
we could always push it off till Saturday.
Oh, I know.
If you're feeling a little better on Saturday. But you did a lot of work, a lot of research. It's a heck of a lot of research that you did.
Yeah, I think one of the things that it's really weird, which ironically plays into the comment I just read. I like the rabbit trailing. Actually, that's one of the things that I'm starting to find out the more that I look into different things, and it goes back to what I said earlier about you start to see these links between things, and it's really kind of you wonder. What the plan is on some of this stuff. And when I say plan, let's say hypothetically you're looking at an alien invasions. Like, how would you do it? Would you do it with large ships that orbit over cities a la Independence Day, or would you do it quietly, like They Lived, where, you work your way into a society quietly and slowly and methodically to where one day you turn around and you're like one of the few human, like Body Snatchers, you're one of these few humans left in a world full of aliens. But as we've said before, I don't really believe in aliens. I believe that most everything can be explained with demonology or with I really do believe it's that simple. I mean, I think things, archontics and creatures like that have been around since the dawn of time, before we even existed. I mean, I think we are immortal beings. I think we are spiritual beings. I think we are spiritual energy. And I do believe in God, and I do believe in Jesus Christ. And I think that the energies that coalesce to create us are definitely God-given. But I also think that one of the best anecdotes that I've ever heard, which is also one of the most terrifying, was that when Jimmy Carter first became president, he had a sighting in the 60s.
He did, yes.
About a UFO sighting, and he decided that in the 70s that he wanted to have someone look into that. So he asked for everything that they could get on UFOs. So all that anybody, this is like a well-known UFO lore, and it could be totally fabricated, but I thought it was interesting if it is true. Apparently, a consultant went into his office, shut the door, told him that what he was going to know was going to be cosmic top secret, and that is actually at least back then, that was a classification. Sat him down, and they had a discussion for a few hours. All that they know is that when this man left, that Jimmy Carter was sitting at his desk sobbing, crying, saying that God didn't exist and he didn't, and they were saying that basically his whole world had broken down. Well, here's my answer to that. Then I think that maybe Jimmy Carter's faith was a little shook, but let's say you got entities that say, oh, we created you. All of evolution is externally corrected. We're aliens from the planet Teldar, and we created all human beings, and you're the product of us. Maybe they did create your body, but they didn't create your spirit. You're an eternal being. So I think, what we're facing and what you're dealing with are again, is all that same spiritual warfare that I find it interesting that these kids, when they're referring to the Mothman, almost all of them, they're looking for some bedrock, which, we're still dealing with that kind of society right now. Those kids were at the start of counterculture revolution. They were at the start of, women's rights, equal rights amendments, all the stuff of the 70s, the things that, like I said, Vietnam was looming. You had civil rights was looming. Everything, the country was about to explode. And I think they could feel that. And they were looking for some kind of a grounding, a karak that their parents had that they didn't have. And I don't think religion was answering that for them. And so they were dealing with something that was really subversive to their whole upbringing and their whole way of life. And it totally just uprooted them completely. And so I think it was still a spiritual battle. Keel was probably an atheist. I don't know if he was a Christian, but he didn't look at it from a religious standpoint. For me, a lot of these entities can be explained very easily by the spiritual beings. And it's funny because you talk to First Nation or Native American, it's like to them, Bigfoot is just another brother out in the cosmic.
Yes, I've heard them speak about it.
Yeah, or the Thunderbird. Yeah.
Sure,
weighing in on the conversation.
Here, I've got some treats. Did you want treats, Teddy? The dog is here. He didn't eat his dinner. I gave him his dinner, and he didn't want it. Sometimes he has to wait a long time until he realizes he's actually
ready to eat. It's ready to chow down.
But these are his favorite treats anyway. They're for puppies. They're salmon and smoked salmon and lamb, I think.
When your animals eat better than you do.
Yeah, they do. I had spaghetti tonight. Lamb and salmon recipe. Oh, yeah. Natural source of DHA. Grain-free. Yeah, this is good stuff. Very good stuff. So, but I'm wondering if that Mothman is literally in and out of another portal because the guy was digging a grave when he saw it. The first sighting was he was digging a grave. And there could have been a portal. They say when someone has died or goes into the light, so to speak, there's the portal opens and it's open for just so long. And if you don't pass through, then you're caught on this side. And I wonder if, because he was digging the grave, you have an open portal because somebody had just died. And this creature, you don't know where the person who died was going to go to. Did this portal open to the not so happy realm, a darker realm that opened up, and then he or she popped out of it, and then in a year's time, another portal opened, and he left. It's something like that, just like a demonic spirit that went in and out into from a portal and back into another portal when someone else died. They just went.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally that's what I'm saying. You could throw any kind of theory to it and try to make it apply. It's amazing, but
It
I
sounds
think a lot
very
of times people
evil.
are.
You know, it really sounds very demonic. I mean, it's just, why would this thing be chasing people? Maybe they were after souls. You know, this demonic thing, you know, came to get a soul. You know, or that was the intention. You know, drag that soul down here, and so it saw some living people and decided to chase them. Hey, I'll get all these. There's about 5 of them. You know, it's
There was
who
one
knows?
of the truck drivers that I told you about earlier that I told you was one of the positive stories that came out of it. Like, he said that when he went over in the water, it was frigid. It was really cold, um, to the point of hypothermic cold. And his pants had actually come down around his ankles and got caught on his shoes and got caught on wreckage under the water. The whole entire bridge fell into the river. And he got caught on the wreckage in his pants. And he says he just remembers very quickly saying, "Lord, please help me." And said it just tore loose, And again, like a lot of people would say, that was just chance. But he said then bales from the truck, which had been secured in the truck and couldn't have come loose any other way, somehow popped up around him. And the one closest to him had a tiny little hole that he could put his finger into to hold on to. And that one finger is what kept him from going swept under by the river. He went miles downriver,
Oh my Lord!
lost all his clothes in sub-freezing, temperatures.
I wouldn't have
Finally got found by
survived.
a boat captain who said that he had heard the crash and was going to go look for survivors. And the boat captain happened to pull the boat in at a 90-degree angle to shore to where he could bump into it. He almost got swept under the boat. They pulled a galley hook, pulled him out of the water, took him to the cabin to where it was heated, wrapped him in a blanket, and then they went to go look for other survivors, which they didn't find any. Not to say there weren't people that did, survive, but he said that he credits everything to his faith, and he said that he felt like that day something very unnatural. He's not into the Mothman theories. He had never even heard of it. He was just a truck driver, and he was driving with a guy from a town here close to us. I mean, but he was from, I think, like Cincinnati or somewhere like that. But he said that he credited God for his recovery and his being saved. And a few years later, he was at one of the memorials there, and he found a tiny card, and it had the name of the man that had been his truck mate. So by chance, he went to the curator of the museum there and said, "Is this such and such? Is there a way I can get a message to him?" Long story short, they had been in the same museum for like just a few minutes and passed each other, and a year would go by, and they got put in touch with each other, and come to find out, that they had relatives that lived just down the road from him now. So it was almost as if this dead man's, the weight that it had on his spirit, this man had been around him in some form or fashion all for, some 50 plus years that this event had happened. And he finally got to talk to this man's family when they were little tiny babies when this happened, little kids. And so they lost their father and never knew what happened. So this man was able to talk to him, and they took him in as part of their family. So he got some sense of closure because of this. So he said that for all the negative things that happened that day, he got new family members. They got a family member of the loss of their father, and it gave him a sense of a higher call to what had happened, as opposed to all the dark things that everybody always talks about. And I just thought I'd rather look at it from that point of view, because he's somebody that had the worst happen to him, but he just kept going and didn't lose faith. He just kept fighting. And I just found that really inspiring, and especially, in light of all the horrible things that had happened to him. And I just thought that it was amazing.
Yeah, maybe that could have been a demon, and that's why what worked. The lights went out because Teddy's lying on it.
No,
The plugs are down here, so he's eating treats.
Oh, is eating the food, cutting out the lights on the Mothman.
At least Mothman.
Yeah, somebody, I forget who asked what kind of dog. Oh, it's Peace asked. Teddy is part, I think, Lhasa. There's some say part Shih
Teddy
Tzu
Crowley.
and part Maltese. Though he looks like he's got something else in there, maybe Sheltie. But I've got a little like 27-second video on my channel of Teddy and Nemo, and you'll see Teddy right after he got groomed very nicely. He needs another little bath.
Growling in the background.
What?
I can hear him growling in the background. He's so
yeah,
cute.
He's breathing. Why he waits this long to eat? You know, when mommy gave him his dinner. It's one of the reasons he asked for his dinner right before the show. So maybe, and then he said, "Yeah, I don't want this." And he realizes how hungry he is. You silly boy. You are so silly. You're the cutest dog in the world. Yes, you are. You're so beautiful, my lammy. He looks like a little. He's all white. He looks like a lamb. You look like a lammy. So there's going to be, I hear in September, a third week in September, there's the Mothman Festival.
Mm-hmm.
And how long does that last?
It's going to be crazy though, but we probably are still going to try to go to the museum. It's something Megan and I are going to go try to go to the museum because, I'm not normally one of those people who does like the supernatural tour things. I'm just not. I think I went to Old Salem where we did some ghost hunting years ago, just simply because I'd been there enough times. I'm like, yeah, I'll go with you guys. I'm just not one of those people, but this story really moved me like so much that I want to learn more about the town. I want to learn more about the people.
Go where it happened. Go to the graveyard. Go where, go where the sightings happened and where the bridge was.
Yeah,
isn't there a diner too that's dedicated to Mothman?
Yeah, I mean, there's like the town. A lot of people accuse the town of like commercialism and all this other stuff, but it brings like millions of dollars in during the I think it's the third week of September, to the town, and and as you know, West Virginia, there's a lot of poverty in West Virginia. I remember when we were traveling to Ohio in the 80s, like one of the things I remember very, very distinctly was we passed through a town where the kids literally would come out and beg for food, and it was heartbreaking.
That's horrible.
And the kids, I just remember like one of the families talking about how they didn't move trailers. They burned the trailers down and put a new trailer on top of the ashes because they just didn't have somebody to move. I mean, it's like horrible. But I mean, I'm not saying that all of West Virginia. I'm just saying I just distinctly remember that being really, when we were going through on our way to Ohio, like that was just that stuck in my memory like so much. From like I guess it was like the mid 80s, late 80s when Scott and I were up there, and it's just that I don't see why any town that they want to. The good news is that like it also preserves the memory of the people that perished on the on the bridge. In this run, I think the museum was originally run by a lady whose family had perished in the bridge, and I think it's been taken over by a guy who has written a number of books on the Mothman phenomena. Really well-known author there, and it's dedicated to not only the Silver Bridge, the movie, the phenomena of Mothman and the sightings, but it documents also all the documents that I read tonight, like the police reports, the original copies and everything are in that museum. The handwritten notes that Linda and Mary had written, and a lot of the like pieces of the bridge and things like that are there. So it's like a really well documented trip through what happened during the 13 or 14-month period of the Mothman.
And the police reports and the articles in the newspapers. It wasn't something that just happened just to get attention. Of course, they didn't. This festival didn't start till 2002.
It was it was more recent.
So it had nothing. They didn't try to make money on it. Then these people were devastated. This thing happened. There's a paper trail. The police reports and the articles in the newspaper.
Yeah, a lot of Mary's stuff is there from her other articles. I think it was the real interest started kicking up in 2002 after the Richard Gere movie.
So that's a long time after. If they were going to make
Yeah.
money, and if it was fake, it would have been way back then. So get that out. If anybody out there is thinking that, get that out of your heads really fast, because it doesn't.
Yeah, because I mean, you
that
have
doesn't hold water.
you know, out northwest they have Bigfoot festivals. In Scotland they have Nessie festivals. I mean, it's not like
It's true.
they burn an effigy of Nessie every year.
Why do they burn the effigy? I know the Wicker Man. Don't they do the
Roswell.
Wicker Man?
Do what now?
The Wicker Man. They'll build a Wicker Man and they burn that.
Oh yeah,
because it's a part of the
Crowley. Aleister Crowley had an actual cottage on the shores of Loch Ness.
Yes, he did,
and
the
3 times.
Was it Jimmy Page bought it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and the last time that when Jimmy finished with it, and he left, it burned down for the 3rd time. And I don't know if it's been rebuilt yet or not. I haven't checked, but what's interesting is that would be a whole nother show.
That is another show. Yeah,
Crowley that Aleister Crowley. And if you want to be creeped out and stay up all night, Aleister Crowley summoned a demon called Lamb, Lam. Just Google that sometimes if you want to stay up all night.
Yeah, I did learn about Crowley. I checked into that to see if it was true what they were saying about him. Is it true or not? Is he? Because funny, because on Coast to Coast, they had a woman, which our Bell said was a real broom riding, cauldron stirring witch, and somebody called, and supposedly she kept changing her she had 1,000-year lineage of Strago witch and then when you study backwards, she first called herself her Genovese, which is what she called the lineage. And then when she gets on Coast to Coast, when she first got on Coast to Coast, she called it Genovese, 1,000-year lineage. Her grandfather saw that she had the psychic power. And then she changed the name of Strega Toscana, which means Tuscany witch. And that whole Strega thing, that is a whole other show. It's impossible to have a goddess religion that lasted that long throughout all of Italy, because Italy was in a country. It was made up of different provinces, and each province spoke a different dialect. Nobody could understand each other. So the whole thing, she told, somebody called, and I thought that was really odd. You've got the 1,000-year lineage, and somebody calls and says, how do I learn about magic? And she said, read Aleister Crowley. So I said, I didn't want to demonize her. I didn't know enough about her to demonize her. Was she BSing the whole story on her background? And so I learned all about Aleister Crowley, and I thought to myself, lots of the stuff that he did was really awful. It just, I won't repeat it on this show. But he also did horrible rituals, and he also didn't finish that, because he brought up demons and he didn't send them back. He just stopped. So he actually opened up portals to bring demons in. So if you're going to tell anybody where do I learn witchcraft, you don't learn it from Aleister Crowley. And he's supposed to.
There was actually people had said that, like, he would have spell books that, like you said, were impartial or would have hidden spells that if you were to do them, it could cause death. Or he would have chemical experiments, but he would not list like critical chemicals, so people would mix them and get hurt. He did things like that all the time. What's interesting though is that there was a theory that all of that was a cover for Aleister, because he was in the OSS.
Yes, I read that too. Yeah.
He was actually working for the war effort and all this other stuff, and it's like really
But
amazing.
he wrote all those books, the Book of the Law. He did write a lot of books, but he was also friends with L. Ron Hubbard and Anton LaVey and Gerald Gardner, who started Wicca. It's like they were all friends with each other. He wanted Gerald Gardner to take over for him. But there is an account of Aleister Crowley falling on his head, really getting a severe head trauma, which would make sense that he did all these evil, crazy things later on, because that can do that. They say that can do it to you. But yeah, it's if it's really a cover, he did an awful lot of stuff and wrote an awful lot
Yeah.
of books, and
Yeah,
even
I mean,
did some
and
kind of in the Great
example of
Pyramid.
I just remember reading about Lamb and seeing that photo or drawing that he made, and it was just like the creepiest thing I'd ever seen. And I said, if you summon that, why on earth would you not send it back? Whatever it is. I mean,
Yeah, and that's what he did at Loch Ness, and that's why that Jimmy Page bought that house. Oh my lord!
Yeah,
Oh
Jimmy
my
was
lord!
let's see. Somebody asked. I was always understood Aleister Crowley to be kind of a hybrid of existentialism and cultism. What do you guys say? That's an accurate assessment, or am I off base? I think Aleister Crowley, of all the occultist people, he occulted more than anybody probably ever. I mean, he
Because
was
he called himself 666. He called himself
the
the
beast.
Beast.
Yeah, he
I mean,
was
and then he does all these
daddy of
horrible with
occultism.
the skeleton and the snake coming out of it, and giving the skeleton a meal so to reanimate it. He did all these things, and his last thing that he did it with his son, or said it was apparently his son died. He summoned some kind of demon, and the son died of fright. And after that, he died in a flop house. He was doing lots of drugs, and they found him on the floor of a flop house, taking, just going way downhill. So it just, he's not anybody. If he was working with something, he would have retired somewhere. He was really working with demons. And if this is how your end is, then my assessment, and even Styx, Hexenhammer 666, who is no longer a Satanist, says that he didn't finish his spells. I read that, and he said that he does. Seems like Styx didn't have any, and Styx hundreds of grimoires he's edited and he's read. Of course, he has to read them all for editing them. So I would say he knows what he's talking about. And so he really didn't give him any credibility as even being a good warlock or a good sorcerer, because he didn't finish what he was doing. So he really doesn't sound like. And if you read some of the he was sexually abusive to the point of like drawing blood and hanging people in closets, and his wife in closets, and having multiple partners, and eating something afterwards after he did that is so gross I will not say it on this show. He's absolutely, they say that what makes sense scientifically, if you look as far as the doctors and people in the know goes, he had he fell on his head, something happened, an extreme concussion, which caused a personality change, which makes sense. Everything that he ended up doing makes sense if you have that kind of head trauma. You really, if you're a real witch or you really want people to learn about magic, you're not going to point them to him. Once you start learning about him and what he did and how he ended his life, there's no way you're going to point anybody in that direction. Not because they call her the good witch. And then I went back and I'm not sure if you can still find this on the web, but I researched this woman. And after she died, I researched her. As it turns out, she decided she belonged to a satanic church in the 70s, like co-owned it with somebody else, and then she broke in Chicago, and then she broke off and had her own. And then during the 80s, she was on the psychic hotline. You dial 100, 800, whatever, and you talk to a psychic, and you have to pay money every minute.
Miss
So
Cleo.
it sounds to me like she was into whatever she could make money on. And then she, as it turns out, Art said, I want a real cauldron stirring broom riding witch to call. And apparently he knew her through somebody else. That's how he got her. She didn't just call one night, but it's kind of like it was made to look like that. And she had some kind of company that made oils, magical oils, and you could get herbs, blessed herbs, whatever, and learn how to do a little spell here and there. And she said, these are ancient recipes, thousands of years old. Well, I even checked out that, and the recipes for these oils are all hoodoo. Everything was hoodoo. None of this came out of Italy.
I would just say, hey, I made this last week and buy it on my website. Just be honest.
So it's basically they just put her, you put her name on it, and she must have coupled with a company that was selling this stuff. Didn't have a big name on it, but when she got onto Coast to Coast, she got a name, and she would tell you to go buy this stuff. She'd always hawk the company, which is after she died, first it was going to be, everything was going to go because she was dead. She couldn't make anything anymore. And so they were going to go out of business. And then all of a sudden they hung on for years. And I'm going, she's not making this stuff anymore. And you're making up new oils and she had whatever her 1,000-year lineage, only she knew how to do this. And you're only supposed to pass it on to somebody in your family. You can't pass it on to somebody who's not in your family. And so if she wasn't there to make these oils or make new oils, you knew they were making them, and it was just her name on the bottle to sell more stuff. And supposedly they also auctioned off her Book of Shadows, which, if she has 1,000-year lineage that was going to die with her, that nobody but anybody in her family could know these spells, then you don't auction off her Book of Shadows. So was it her book? Did somebody make it after she died? Because they hawked it off like 1 or 2 years after she died. They had enough time. And all her stuff, like when you go in, she does her psychic thing and tarot card reading. She had all these old looking books that were not like top of the line magic books, and all this stuff like paraphernalia that made it look like, oh, there's the crystal ball, there's the wand, like the queen would hold her scepter. She had a scepter, and all this stuff that they auctioned off, but it was basically a showpiece. So when you walked in and you wanted services, and I think it was like $365 for her to do a psychic reading on you. I was like, wow, that's a lot of money, like a half an hour. But even Glynis McCants, who's the numbers lady, she's into numerology. If you want her to do a reading on you, it's also almost $400. It's like I'm going, I've got a book. I'll read the book.
Yeah, I think that $400 is the number
for this little bit. She's so good, and it's like, wow. And then because she's got other people working for her, which are probably the people who write up they're the ones that are probably doing it.
Prince would have never released all the songs that his family are releasing right now. So you're just like, yeah, it's just a big old money grab. So
yeah, exactly.
So if Point Pleasant wants to make money on Mothman, I say, have at it.
Yeah, but that's probably I think when you kind of like when you look at everything and you kind of like you did, you researched everything and you came to a conclusion. I researched Crowley and this particular witch, which Astrega in Italy means that, where the Catholic Church said that witches are all having sex with the devil, and no, they're not, they're healing people. Well, in Italy there are two magical women, and Astrega means that you are a black magic witch and have sex with the devil, and you do black magic to do harm and evil. And then there's another one.
It means beast, I think. I mean, it's like that's what you refer to for beast, I think. Strega. It's like Strega, yeah, or Strega. I think that means beast. If I'm not mistaken.
That could be the word. So, but if you are, and they say, oh no, that's why they burn them, because they healed with herbs. Well, in Italy, there's the other kind of, it's not a witch, they call them the Benedicaria. They have many names, and they heal with herbs. And they, and the thing about it is they do, there's all sorts of things that they do, prayers, healing, or they do healing oils, herbs, but not one of these good witches, you could say, was called them good witch because people don't understand that Strega means witch, and Benedicaria is a woman who's a miracle worker. Not one throughout all of history in the Inquisition of these women, because they were doing good work. They weren't working with the devil. They weren't trying to do black magic and do harm to people. Not one was burned to death at the stake. In fact, the church basically left them alone. Sometimes the priest would go up a hill, see how they were doing, but they basically left them alone. So it's really interesting how even witchcraft is sold to people and they don't really know, especially Italian witchcraft is sold to people and they don't even know. Was it Gardner's Wicca is partly this book called Aradia, who wrote that? So there, a turn of the century, I forget his name, Charles Leland. He was fascinated by Italy, and every province you go, there's folk magic all over Italy. And they said when he went to get the information from these women, he said, I want stories about witches and stories about magic. And so the women went, and he paid them for it. So you tell these Italian women, oh yeah, I got a story. Yeah, go out and tell them, he'll give you money. And Wicca is based on Aradia. It's a mixture of Leland's book, but then there's Stregheria, which is basically Wicca with, they say a Wicca with pasta sauce, and it's not totally not true. It's just because being half Italian, I just studied and even studied folklorists from Italy. That I went right down to the bare bones to get the truth, and I go, how interesting, because people like to demonize so much, and that they don't know history to know that, wait a second, before you demonize, you've got to know the truth. That's why I said, okay, she's saying that Aleister Crowley is a good source to learn from. I heard he was bad news. I'm going to go study him from the ground up, or the bare bones up, because I don't want to have the wrong impression of him. And then later on, I asked Styx about, and he said, no, he never finished anything he did. And that's true and that's what he did with that house, which I had read before Styx said to me. But apparently he knows the whole spiel, the whole thing. And he didn't have any respect for him either. So that's the dope. And it's kind of, before you really get into something, really learn things from the ground up, which is what you did, which is what you're doing, and you're bringing here because you read the reports, and also with witches, they read the police reports too. When witches were burned, and they were mostly actually they have a whole list that were burned in Italy, and those are the ones that would not give up the devil. They said, get rid of say no to the devil and accept Jesus Christ. Hey, if I was a witch and somebody was going to burn me, and I accept Jesus Christ. It's like, would any normal person have done
The
that?
fire would starts getting stacked under your feet. Suddenly, the faith comes.
I kind of wonder if there was drugs involved, because I think any normal person, even if it would say yes, accept Jesus, and then just leave town if you didn't want to practice the church. Who the heck wants
to? It's a big boot. You can go anywhere on the boot. Just find a place.
Yeah, or just leave the country, or it just get out of there. But
forget
I don't know,
about
it doesn't make so the smallest amount of people, witches, were burned in Italy. It's the other countries in Europe that really burned witches en masse. So that's because when you're talking about the police reports, the police records, and it's interesting. I thought of that right away. It's interesting that they considered, because in Rome, in Italy, they wrote everything. Everything was written down. Everything was cataloged. It wasn't just like, here's, oh, we saw this person, she's a witch. That was happening in Scotland and England, and the really bad stuff. They were just taking some child's witness statement, and then they would just kill them in some way.
Usually hang them. Now we're gonna have to kill you. Yeah, we're gonna put 20 rocks on you, and if you float to the surface, then you'll survive.
Yeah, that's right. And if you drown, that means you're not.
It means you're innocent.
So we have. What my point is that we can't forget the gravitas of how important the police report is, because you read the police reports, and like you can go back and read those investigations, and we do have them, investigations into these in people who claim to be witches, and you can tell by the police report how they investigated it. So you could say, well, they just made this up. They just want to demonize this person, or is this a real investigation? And this is what they really found. In some cases, they really did find they did things to children that were really bad, and then sacrificed them on the altar. So that's really, really bad. But so the police reports that you were talking about, you can read them, and we can have an eye, the critical eye of today, and a police officer, or if you need to ask someone, you could say, does this witness statement sound like they're making this up? Or does this sound credible? Because now they know a lot more about, there are tells when a person speaks, if they're telling the truth. If they touch their face. Sometimes if you touch your nose, that means it's on the nose. If you keep touching your face, it means you're lying. It depends on where your eyes look. They can tell, and they've all been trained to look for these tells. So you could take those witnesses, even though the police officer might have even written down how the person was acting when they were giving this witness statement. But you could, a modern police officer today that's much more educated in all those little tells would be able to look at these witness statements, even though they're from the 60s, and tell you if this seems like a credible witness statement. They look back. That's what investigators do now. They look back and to see, did this really happen? Is this really credible? And then they compare it with events that happen today. And sometimes they say, yeah, people are the same when they give witness statements today as then, when it's an honest witness statement, even if it differs from someone else, like the Titanic, we can tell that it's an honest, credible statement. So I thought that that was very important that you brought up the police reports, that you investigated the police reports, and also the newspaper articles too. Those things are very, very important. Like court hearings too. I used to be a paralegal, and so when they were demonizing, saying no, a certain person we will not mention, I went back and read the pleadings, read all the court documents, even though parts were redacted. And I could tell if it was whose side was telling the truth and whose side wasn't. Or, and that today we just hear, no, he's evil, he's a racist, it's blah, blah, blah. I go, no, I actually went back and read the documents, and I read what was also going on historically at that time in that city and in the nation. And that had a lot to do with what was going on.
Context.
That particular court case. And why it was even brought, and why this one person, though all the what do you call it, landlords all over the country were having the same problem. Why did they pick on this one, the biggest? You pick on the biggest because there were riots going on from 68 to 72. And the government wanted to officially appease everyone. So they went after the biggest one. And see, in that particular case, when people who got welfare, anybody who got welfare was poor, they gave them the money directly, and then they wouldn't give it to the landlords. So the landlords all over the country they didn't want to take in people on welfare because they knew that they weren't going to get paid. And this was ridiculous because this particular person owned buildings and did rent to people on welfare, and all those buildings were full, but also had more buildings for wealthy people. So the accusation was a complete and total lie that he would not rent to people who were on welfare or of certain communities. Complete lie. Look at my buildings; they're all full. Take them all in, even if they get welfare, which means even if they don't pay, he wasn't kicking anybody out. So the whole thing was a lie.
Mothman could have gone in and like evicted everybody. I'm just kidding.
That's right. That's right. So people don't realize that it's more than just, before you poo something that really seems, that sounds crazy, there are ways of investigating and going back, even though it's back in time, like I did. I went back practically to the same time period, just maybe a few years later. And I investigated the whole thing, and I looked at all the documents and all the police reports and what was going on historically at that time. And it painted a whole picture. And then, And unfortunately, it should have really been presented. Things should have been presented a little differently than there were. And you kind of don't condense things and talk quickly and cut corners. You really have to paint that picture so people really know what's going on. So before you poo-poo the Mothman or anything else, there are ways that you can go back in time and documents you can look at. And even people today, if you wanted to go and ask questions of, oh, this was your mother or how did she, how was she throughout, like before that happened? How was she after that happened? She's passed away. How was she? What did she say? Did she still attest to this? Was she in her right mind? There's so many questions you can still ask today for things that did happen over 50 years ago. So you've done a very thorough investigation, and I was very impressed that you got the police reports and the newspaper articles, and you looked at all these pieces which do tell a story and paint a picture of what a right today a prosecutor or a detective would, what they were looking for tells that they're looking for. Is this credible or is this nonsense? And you've read all this, and in your opinion, you say that you believe them, that this evidence shows that something really did happen. And it's not just the evidence, and it's not just I'm sure it's not just your mind's analysis. Your gut tells you. And lest we forget that God gave us the intuition, and even a mother's intuition, she knows there's something's going on with her child. And people say that psychic ability doesn't exist. Well, how come some mothers know in the pit of their gut when something is happening to their child, and they're right about it?
It's
Except
like Megan, I always use the quote from Fantastic Mr. Fox, where Mrs. Fox, she goes, "If what I think is happening, it better not be." Yeah, that's our favorite little quote from Mrs. Fox.
yeah.
She
So
because she knows that her husband's up to no good, and she can
that's
feel
right.
it.
You can feel it,
She
and
doesn't
I
know
think
what it is exactly, but she knows it's something, and so it's like, yeah.
I think most of us do have. All of us have had it. Most people just poo-poo it as coincidence. And if you kind of just poo-poo it and you don't stop and listen to your gut from time to time, or just listen to your gut, because I think it's a gift from God. Just listen, don't poo-poo it. It's and that's the reason why I think some people have honed their ability and they're a little bit better at psychic ability, and some people just completely poo-poo. Oh yeah, that happened once or twice, but that was just some kind of coincidence because you didn't take it seriously, and then you stopped listening to your gut. Your gut, your heart. Even the Egyptians said that the heart, everything is in the heart. The mind is in the heart, not in the brain. That's why they got rid of the brain when they mummified someone, and then they left the heart in, and they put the scarab on the heart, because that was the most important part. And on the back of the scarab, it says, because this is what you're supposed to say when you before you enter the duat, when the scales of Mot, the feather of Mot, they put on one scale and they put your heart on the other, and your heart's supposed to weigh less than the feather. But on the other side of the scarab is kind of like crib notes for the soul that wants to enter the duat, which is heaven, which is you're carrying on whatever you did in life, you carry it on without disease and misery in the duat. But on the back of the scarab, it said, I have not lied. I have not cheated. I have not. So the soul can read that to Osiris and the two goddesses, that I haven't done any of these things. I was good to make sure they get into the duat. So it's in, we have to trust. And I think it's interesting that the Egyptians feel that everything is here, the soul is here, everything is here in the heart, and we get that feeling inside of our body. Our minds will we talk ourselves out, and also we drive ourselves crazy too, thinking over and over again, and maybe we're wrong. Oh, I made a mistake, and then we go crazy. But if we are centered and sure-footed, and our legs are firmly planted, our feet are firmly planted in the soil, grounded, we will trust more our gut and our heart. They say there's more nerve endings in the gut, in your stomach, than there are anywhere else in your body. So you get that feeling that something isn't right. Trust. So even science says trust your gut. And people say no, they poo-poo so many things, but when you start studying all this, and then you say, okay, I'm going to study it I'm gonna do a scientific approach on this, not just do all this. What did you do? How did you study this out? And say, well, actually, I took a scientific approach. And you realize that where you can tell what is true and what is not true. So thank you, David. You did such a wonderful job, and you did all the things I would have told you to do to make your work credible. You did a great job.
The puppy, like, really, that's what it's like. The Big Lebowski, the puppy brought the room together. That's what I think.
Yeah,
We should let the puppy host the show. The puppy would do a great job.
I gave them all the treats the entire
my
day.
gosh!
But they're little. They're
Rob
puppy.
And the puppy do a show together because I would love to.
They're puppy bites, so they're soft, and there wasn't much. But I gave him the entire bag, and you know what? He just fell asleep.
No,
he's right here.
Well, I'm going to do the same thing myself. I got to be up in a couple hours, but I had a good time. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah. And tomorrow night, I was thinking I might read some news, some interesting news, maybe like discoveries, scientific discoveries, things, interesting things that are happening that outside of the miserable things that are happening. And I was thinking that if anybody who is in the comment section might want to, if you have a story of the paranormal, if you have a UFO sighting that you've seen or something, and you want to get the link and come into the studio, you can use an avatar so people will not see who you are. So, and you can just kind of like calling into a radio show, and you tell your story. So I figured tomorrow night I can have some news. You could say any kind of mysteries of the world that science has just discovered, things
if
that we
you're
can't
Mothman
explain.
and you want to call in and give your side of the story.
Yeah, Mothman. He should have come. He should have come already.
Like,
and so it depends on. Hopefully, it won't be too long a stream. But
I have an eye condition. If people make fun of my eyes, they're red. You know.
That's right. My reputation has been
I have been slandered by the people of
years. My reputation.
I'm not a Satanist. I was there on vacation with my family. They took my vacation.
Oh my God. That's wing phobia. What would they call it? This fat shaming, wing shaming.
Wing shaming. Look, just because I'm a flying humanoid doesn't give you the right. Yeah.
Red eye shaming.
Yeah.
Funny feet shaming, whatever. I know the whole thing.
Yeah, just so because I've got hooves for feet doesn't make me a bad flying person. I feel too. Yeah, that would be so awesome. And this is my son's little moth. That would be epic.
Let's see.
Mini moth.
And on this earth for since 64. I guess that makes me an old man. I think you're the same age as didn't Barack Obama, wasn't he born in 1964? No, he's 60. He's 60.
I am the worst on presidents. Like he was
60. He says he's 60 on the 4th of August. Though they're celebrating his birthday today. Oh no, you're not an old man. You just get wiser and wiser with time. So thank you to everyone. And Dylan Shulgi, born in 92 myself. If you want to come back tomorrow and you've got an interesting paranormal story, I'll say some of the news, and then I'll tell you some of the news, and I can even give you links to the articles if you. I'm not making anything up. Let's go. And it's more of a positive news report than what we hear every day. Oh no, lockdowns might begin again. And instead of getting depressed,
it's all definitely designed to break your spirit. Don't let it break your spirit. Everything in this world is designed specifically to push back against you. So once you learn that, once you understand that, then you know that you can overcome that.
We can't let it. We gotta stay.
Yeah, as Megan just said, you got to stay positive. Don't let that stuff
That's
beat you up.
right.
They've been talking about
That's
the end
our
of the
rule.
world for decades since I was a kid.
I know, and then the economy, everything.
A
That's we
Mothman
get
on
that
every corner.
24 hours a day. We get that news, right? It's never ending. So
Yeah.
there's other things. This world is still full of mysteries, still of things that we
Oh, yeah.
don't understand about the inception of the universe and this earth. Questions that are not answered yet, that are interesting. And the only way we're going to get through all the bad stuff is that we assume bad stuff will always happen. We have to focus on other things, get inspired by these things, and get stronger and lighthearted. And that's the only way we're going to get through.
Yeah, sense of humor.
So,
Definitely.
Dylan says, "Oh yeah, I love Art Bell. I listened to him for many years at the end of his life. He was great till the end. Haven't listened to much of Nori though. He's completely different. Nori and Art did not get along. Art had his own way of doing things, which made the show really fun. And George Nori doesn't like to some of the stuff that Art he didn't want to carry on. And so Art really couldn't do it. Art started the show. He hired Nori and they basically pushed him out. And because he wanted to be on the radio, because there were he used to do, there would be certain lines he'd have open, and a podcast, you would have to know that the podcast exists when it's on, find it on the computer. But he felt that all these cryptoids or all these mysterious entities that are in the world most likely might be driving down the highway and listening to their radio and looking for a better song or something interesting to listen to, and just might happen upon Art Bell's channel so they can call into his show. So Nori didn't want to do that, but that's what made the show the show. You know, and apparently they lost a huge amount of listeners afterwards because the show completely changed. Though I respect George Nori for what he does do, it's not fun. It's just not as fun as Art Bell. He was
I will say this though, I'll take up for George Nori in this way. I remember he came to our town for an event, and he was asking everybody in the audience like what was subjects that they felt were something that hadn't been covered, that he really felt that that we would like to hear covered. So I mentioned Archons to him, and John Lamb Lash, and the whole thing about how Gnosticism and so forth. And sure enough, less than like a month later, he had a show on that. So he actually listens to his listeners, and you hate him or love him, whatever. I like him.
Oh no, he has a different way.
I like Art Bell. I love George. I love George Knapp. I like all of them. All three of them. So I'm one of those people. But then again, I'm one of those people who loves all the Aliens movies. I'm one of those people. So I'm that boring guy.
Yeah.
But I think
I like
there's benefits and negatives to everybody. But the thing I love about that show is that it also helped me a lot too, in trying to understand what other people have been through, and it helped me out a great deal, because it's one of those things where you wonder if anybody else has had experiences and how they approach things, and the way when you hear the way that some people handle things, some people clammed up and never got recovered from it, and then other people, it just made them stronger. And it's kind of like I decided that that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and take the things that I've experienced and just try to learn more, everything that I can about whatever this world is, the real world, not the world I had been living in, but the world that changed the minute that I started seeing the things that I saw. And so now that I know that, then I can move forward and start to build my own idea of how the world functions. Whether everybody agrees with that, you shouldn't.
No,
Everything should be.
I think it's
Everything should be.
mysteries
You have to find your own way, and so that's the thing that you each of you will have to do it at some point in your life, either now, beginning now, or you've been doing that, or sometime in the future. You're going to have to come to terms with things that you've never dealt with before, and everybody's going to handle it differently. But the best thing to do is to embrace that change and just try to work with it, flow with it, and master it, and face the future with a different paradigm, and just make yourself into somebody who can flow with it, because there's always going to be upheaval and there's always going to be change, and we definitely live in a time of ultimate strangeness. So
Yeah.
So especially with the COVID and all the nonsense, around that, some people out there are struggling with it, while some of us are just like, that you just have to take it a day at a time and have faith, and if you're not a person of faith, like Felina said, just try to have a sense of humor and approach it with a sense of humor and try to laugh at things. You'll live a lot longer. You'll be a lot more stable, because you have a better time at life, and you won't be as stressed out. So trust me, I'm a person who, you can ask Megan, I'm stressed out a lot, but
Yeah, and
it doesn't really accomplish anything. So don't do that. It's bad for your health. That's all Uncle Dave's going to say.
That's right. It's so important to focus on the eternal things, the things that are important, and the mysteries that this world still has to offer at a time where something could get us. So this will not destroy us unless we let it destroy us. We have to live through it, just like the people throughout time lived and survived throughout those calamities. And there should be more, which there isn't. I don't understand why, when you do a lockdown and you take away so much from the people, and we hear of all these stories of people getting very, very depressed, a lot of deaths happening, cancer screenings, all sorts of things, tests not being done because of COVID. That it's almost like they're not saying, okay, now we're going to really support you. This is difficult. We're making you lock down. We're making you wear masks, but we're not going to treat you like you're a criminal. We're going to support you because this is difficult for everyone. And I thought that was usually when there's something that happens, it's happening throughout the country. When they realized during the Obama administration that children got bullied in school, it's always happened. I got bullied all the time. I got beaten up all the time. And they said, we're going to stop this, which was probably just mostly talk, but we're going to do something about it, and we're going to be aware about it, or aware about domestic violence, the whole OJ case, and everybody, the whole domestic violence thing, what women endure in relationships. We're always very we become highly focused on protecting and supporting and giving voice to the people who suffer and giving protection. This time is different. It's like, don't wear the mask. Don't, you're on lockdown. It's like they're not supporting us. So we, in that way, and in England, it's completely different. The royal family gets on Zoom, like this Zoom or something, and they stop and they talk to people all over the country and
Three
listen
Stooges
to
is
them.
telling you you're about to lose more subscribers. No politics.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm saying that this is why we're doing this. So we don't. So there's things to be inspired about. There's mysteries to be solved. We have to remember humanity has been through worse things than all this, throughout time. We have to remember that we're new on this planet, and though I do believe in reincarnation, but we have to remember that these things happen and we survive anyway, and we find a way to survive, and we find a way not to get depressed, no matter what's going on. And this program is, I'm doing it this way to help support people and lift people up out of.
Or as Noah's thought says, give the stress to God, he will take it away. Exactly.
That's right. That's right. Which we forget to do. It's very easy to forget because they even close the churches. So, you know what I mean? But we can still talk to God unless we forget, even if we can't go to church. We can still
I mean, if you think about it, you know, I hate to do the thing where people try to make something fit that doesn't, you know, the round hole with a square peg. But if you think about how the kids that had to deal with that entity, like I said, I think they were floating without a compass. They felt
There was no
hopeless. They felt
support.
scared. Yeah,
It
and I
was
think what would
nobody
have
to
been, how
talk to.
different would it have been if the sheriff had actually gotten in there with them to try to determine what was going on? If
Exactly
the
what
community
happened,
had
yeah.
rallied around them, and then if the churches had reached out to them and asked them if they needed anything. In other words, there's ways of handling this kind of darkness if you
Right.
band together. Because if you're, you know, I hate to borrow the Planet of the Apes thing, but apes together strong. You know, if all of us band together on a lot of this stuff, and push back and don't let the darkness overtake one person, because when one person falls, then another person falls. We're still all part of the same whole. You got to remember, we're part of that same universal whole. God made us, you know, like I said, it's about that idea of the pleroma, that we all came from the fullness of God, and that each of us is an individual creature, but we're all very much attached to one another and to all other life and to this planet and to God. And each of us, you know, not to get all Luke Skywalker here, but we, you know, we do share a force and attraction between all of us, you know, a life force and an energy. And like we said, energy can be drained or energy can be created, good or bad. So maybe it's a time that try to create a little bit more good energy with each other and try to understand each other, you know, not to get all hippie. But and I certainly looked the part. I'm looking at this camera and it's terrifying. I'm just saying that it's about denial, distraction, separation, making us think that each other's the enemy, and when in fact we're really each other's best hope for lifting ourselves out of this. So just
That's
try to
right.
remember that we're all brothers and sisters. That's all I'm trying to say.
That's right. That's very good to end on. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
And Three Stooges is right. No politics.
I just thought that was so
politics.
funny.
It's the
Three
calamity
Stooges
of the
keeps us
day.
straight. That's what it is.
What was that?
I said he keeps us honest. So
Yeah, it's the calamity. There will always be a calamity of the day, even if there isn't anything that's like what's going on now. There's always something that's bad, and there's always something that's good. You know,
yeah,
if you're
there's always a new crisis that
the-
gets created. It's, you know, it's
That's
always
right.
the action reaction. Just don't react. Just do your job and take care of each other, and everything else will take care of itself.
Right.
It's a
Right. And we have to
self-balancing
remember
system.
that.
That's what they want. They want you to be scared. They want you to be unbalanced. They want you to be unhinged. They want you to be afraid. Don't. So,
Yeah.
as Megan always
They're not. You know, they're having parties and picnics and
Oh yeah,
so
they want you to wear a mask, but they want to have like a barbecue outside with like 50,000 people, and you know.
yeah. It well we that's right, no politics.
I guess that we should all everybody get barbecue. Yeah, I'm down with that. Yeah. So I mean, food, just any food, I don't care. Pizza, I'm good with that. All right, I'll shut up now.
Okay, God bless all of you, and thank
God
you
bless
for
everybody.
joining. And hopefully tomorrow night, if this channel is still on the air, uh,
You'll be on there.
well, we'll have some fun. If you want to come on after I read some of the news, some articles, and if you've got some stories, then you can come on and tell us a story. Something happened to you that's paranormal, or just something amazing.
Sounds awesome. Let me watch you guys for a change instead of me running my fat mouth. You guys get on
Oh
here.
no! Because you have, I like your take on these things. They say somebody comes on and they start talking about UFOs or ghosts or something paranormal. You you would give your take about what you know about it. In fact, because you've studied it so much, that you could basically prop up the bolster the person who's witnessing was a witness to this particular event. You'll have your analysis of it. So you talking is good. So don't poo-poo you talking. You have some valuable information and many years of studying all this. So
Do we have shirts made up that say no with the poo poo? Because that would be epic.
No poo-poo.
No
what's
poo-poo.
that?
Could we have shirts made up that say no with the poo poo or no poo poo?
No poo-poo.
No poo-poo.
Yeah, y'all don't mind me. I'm gonna be getting up in a couple hours. I'm just like I'm delirious. I'm going to work in a few hours to like get stuff done. I'm so crazy. Anyway, thank y'all for having me, and thank
Oh,
you
God.
all the time for all the wonderful, beautiful comments y'all say. I don't know when I'll see everybody again, but because it's work schedule's out of control. But I love all you folks. Please take care of each other, take care of yourselves, and watch out for Felina. See, Dylan said poo pooers will be fined. There will be no poo poo. We're gonna make Dylan poo poo minister so he can say no to the poo poo. It's all right.
Okay,
This is obviously
thank you.
sleep deprivation, but all right. Love you guys. Thank y'all so much for everything.
All
As
right,
always.
thank you so much, David, and everyone in the comments and section. And if I'm not on tomorrow night, maybe I'll push the show to next week. But I'd like to have a show that just goes on for news and let you guys have a say, talk about your experiences too, and then we'll have David on whenever David wants to come on. You decide and let me know. You can come back next week or you can come back tomorrow, and you can have your analysis of things, whatever you feel like doing. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.
Love y'all. Bye.
God bless you.
Have a great weekend.
That's right. Whoa, this thing doesn't want me to wants me to stay on. Ooh.